We are quietly opening the pages of a text today that, well, it dismantles the universe as we know it, only to reassemble it using nothing but pure geometric logic. We're looking directly into Baruch Spinoza's Ethics, specifically Part 1, which carries the seemingly simple title of God. And just so you know, the book we're exploring is the first section of a 10-part journey we're taking, which will eventually stitch together into one continuous exploration.
It really is a massive journey. And to truly engage with this book, we need to adopt a mindset of absolute stillness. We must quiet the noise of our preconceived notions. If you're listening to this, you're asked to temporarily set aside whatever definitions you currently hold for words like God, substance, or freedom.
Right, because this book attempts to mathematically prove the fundamental nature of existence without relying on, mystical revelation or folklore. It uses a strict geometric structure, definitions, axioms, and propositions to build a reality that is radically disruptive to our daily perception.
The architecture of this text is pristine, but it only supports its own weight if we agree to play strictly by its internal definitions. I mean, we have to enter a highly specific vocabulary, one deliberately designed to eliminate the ambiguities of human emotion and cultural history.
So let's start with that vocabulary, because his definitions are the only building blocks we're allowed to use here. He opens with a concept that, well, it demands deep contemplation right away, the idea of the self-caused. The book defines this as something whose very essence involves existence.
Right. It's a thing whose nature cannot be conceived except as existing. It cannot not exist because existence is woven into what it fundamentally is. And notice how he immediately links this concept of being self-caused to his definition of eternity.
Yeah, which is fascinating because when human beings try to conceptualize eternity, we almost always default to imagining endless time. We picture a clock ticking infinitely into the future.
Or stretching endlessly into the past, exactly.
Mm.
But Spinoza defines eternity as existence itself, as it is conceived to follow inevitably from a thing's definition.
So it's not about time at all.
Not at all. Eternity is a state of necessary being. It is completely divorced from the concept of time or duration.
It's a profound shift from thinking about how long something exists to realizing why it exists. And that requires us to understand how this text views boundaries, specifically the distinction between the finite and the infinite.
Right, and there is a very precise rule given here. A thing is finite only when it can be limited by another thing of the same nature.
So a physical body is finite because you can always imagine a larger physical body limiting it, enclosing it,
Or colliding with it, exactly.
Yeah.
And a thought is finite because it is limited by another, perhaps more comprehensive thought.
It's a counterintuitive rule for us. We're so accustomed to believing a physical wall can stop a thought, or a human thought can move a physical wall.
But an absolute boundary is drawn here. A body cannot limit a thought, nor can a thought limit a body. Things only interact with and restrict things of their own kind.
Which isolates categories of existence, and that prepares us for the core trinity of this entire metaphysical system. Substance, attribute, and mode. These next three words carry the weight of the entire book.
They really do. If we look closely at substance, attribute, and mode, the whole universe starts to restructure itself in our minds. The book defines substance as that which exists in itself and is conceived through itself.
Meaning its concept does not require the concept of another thing to be formed. It is the absolute independent foundation of reality.
Yes. Then we have attribute, which is the lens through which the intellect perceives the essence of that substance. It's how the core reality expresses its nature.
And the third concept is mode. A mode is defined as the affections of a substance, or that which exists in and is conceived through something other than itself.
If we use a metaphor to visualize this abstract trinity, we might think of the ocean. The ocean itself, the vast body of water, represents the substance, the deep underlying necessary reality that exists in itself.
And the modes would be the temporary waves, the ripples, the foam breaking on the shore. The waves cannot possibly exist without the ocean. Their entire being, their shape, their motion is entirely dependent on the water.
Yet the ocean exists independently of any single wave. And the attributes in that metaphor would be the fundamental ways our intellect can comprehend that ocean, perhaps perceiving it as an infinite expanse of physical matter, or understanding it as a vast system of kinetic energy.
With that trinity firmly established, the text delivers its definition of God. And God is not redefined here as a personified creator sitting on a throne, but as an absolutely infinite being.
A substance consisting of infinite attributes, each of which expresses an eternal and infinite essence. This definition alters the very foundation of reality.
And it inevitably forces the redefinition of another deeply held human concept: freedom. A sharp, uncompromising line is drawn between being free and being compelled.
Right. A thing is free if it exists and acts solely by the necessity of its own nature. It is compelled or coerced if it is determined to exist and act in a certain determinate way by an outside force.
Consider an apple tree growing apples. It is not making a conscious choice to grow apples instead of oranges, but it is entirely free because it is acting perfectly according to its internal nature, unforced by any outside limitations.
So freedom in this geometric system is not about possessing multiple options. It's about acting in pure, unhindered accordance with what you inherently are.
Before he even begins building the proofs, the text lays down the axioms, the self-evident truths that govern this new universe. There's a binary rule for existence itself established immediately.
Everything that exists either in itself or in something else. There's no third option.
From there, the fundamental logic of cause and effect is locked into place. From a given definite cause, an effect necessarily follows. And conversely, if there is no definite cause, it is impossible that an effect can follow.
And crucially, the axioms dictate that if things have nothing in common with one another, they cannot be the cause of one another. The knowledge of an effect depends entirely on and involves the knowledge of its cause.
With these definitions and axioms quietly humming in the background, the text begins its geometric proofs. It moves methodically through the first 8 propositions to establish the absolute uniqueness of substance.
The progression is airtight. The first proposition simply states that a substance is prior in nature to its modifications or its modes. You must have the ocean before you can have the waves.
The second proposition applies the axioms directly. 2 substances having different attributes have nothing in common with one another.
Because they have nothing in common, the third proposition dictates that one cannot be the cause of the other.
The fourth proposition explains that distinct things are distinguished either by the difference of their attributes or by the difference of their modes.
And this necessitates the fifth proposition, which carries an immense intellectual weight. It argues that in the universe there cannot be 2 or more substances of the same nature or attribute.
Because if they shared an attribute, they would be the same substance. If they had different attributes, they would have nothing in common and one could not create the other.
Which completely collapses the possibility of pluralism at the deepest level of reality. This logic leads relentlessly to the 6th proposition. One substance cannot be produced by another substance.
Since a substance cannot be created by anything else, and it cannot emerge from nothing, it must be, as proven in the 7th proposition, self-caused. Its very essence must necessarily involve existence.
And if it exists by its own nature and cannot be limited by another substance of the same nature, because the 5th proposition just proved that 2 substances of the same nature cannot exist, it cannot be finite.
Therefore, in the 8th proposition, the text arrives at the inevitable conclusion. Every substance is necessarily infinite. There is only room for one infinite reality.
We must pause to recognize the conceptual density of what has just been built. By carefully stacking propositions 9 and 10, the text establishes that the more reality a thing possesses, the more attributes it has.
And that each attribute of a substance must be conceived through itself. We are looking at a singular, infinite foundation expressing itself in infinite parallel ways, none of which can be reduced to the other.
This brings us to the 11th proposition, where the concept of God is brought back into the geometric frame. It explicitly proves that God, defined as a substance consisting of infinite attributes, necessarily exists.
The argument is that if there is no reason or cause preventing the infinite substance from existing, it must exist. The power to exist is a real power.
Right. An absolutely infinite being must possess absolutely infinite power to exist. Therefore, its existence is undeniable and necessary.
The text anticipates the human mind's resistance to this singularity. In the 12th and 13th propositions, it tackles the concept of indivisibility.
Human beings naturally look at the physical world and attempt to divide it. A specific metaphor regarding water is utilized here. We observe water and perceive that it can be divided, generated, and destroyed.
We watch a puddle evaporate, or we separate a cup of water from a river, and we believe we are
dividing reality. Right.
Yeah.
But the text argues we are only looking at the modes.
The temporary variations.
Exactly. When we look at water as a substance, as fundamental matter itself, it is neither generated nor destroyed. It is infinite and indivisible.
If you could somehow divide an infinite substance, the divided parts would either retain the nature of the infinite substance Or they would not.
And if they did, you would have multiple infinite substances, which the early propositions proved as absurd. If they did not, the substance would have lost its nature and ceased to be, which is impossible for something that necessarily exists.
This rigorous defense of indivisibility sets the stage for what is arguably the ultimate paradigm shift of the entire book, found in the 14th and 15th propositions.
The text states, categorically, except God, no substance can be or be conceived. And the corollary to this is even more striking. Whatever is in God, and nothing can be or be conceived without God.
This is the radical monism that renders this philosophy so disruptive. Historically, thinkers leaned heavily on separating the physical, material universe from a purely spiritual, ethereal God.
The universe was viewed as a separate creation, occupying a different space, while God sat apart from it. This text erases that boundary completely. God is not a distinct entity sitting outside the universe. God is the total fabric of reality.
The text argues extensively against those who claim that corporeal, physical matter is somehow unworthy of the divine nature.
To imagine physical reality as separate from God, or to imagine that physical matter is fundamentally flawed, divisible, or finite, while God is infinite, is a failure of logic here.
Physical extension, the material universe, is simply one of the infinite attributes of the one infinite substance. The universe is not a product distinct from God. It is an expression as God.
If God is the totality of everything, the immediate question is how this infinite reality actually operates. How does anything happen?
Propositions 16 and 17 address the mechanics of this infinite nature. The text states that from the necessity of the divine nature, an infinite number of things must flow in infinite ways.
Everything that is mathematically and logically possible for an infinite intellect to grasp must actually come into existence.
It is vital to understand that this infinite output is not driven by caprice, whim, or what we would traditionally call free choice. God acts solely by the laws of his own nature and is compelled by no one.
Because God is the totality of existence, there is nothing outside of God to force, coerce, or limit him. Therefore, God is the only truly free cause in existence.
Acting with absolute necessity but absolute freedom, because those two concepts merge entirely at the level of the infinite. Historically, people lean on the watchmaker analogy, the idea of a transitive cause.
Someone who builds a clock, winds it up, and then steps away to let it run independently. But this text completely rejects that model in Proposition 18.
God is an immanent cause, not a transitive one. God is not the watchmaker who steps away. God is the gears, the spring, the tension, the metallic structure, and the motion itself.
God remains within the effects. Everything that exists within the cause itself, because there is literally no outside to go to.
And this immanent cause is completely unified with eternity. As Propositions 19 and 20 demonstrate, God is eternal, and God's essence and God's existence are exactly the same thing.
They are eternal, immutable truths. But as we move through Propositions 21 to 27, the geometry must bridge the gap between the infinite and the finite.
If things follow from the absolute nature of God's attributes, they must exist always and as infinite. So how do we explain the finite, temporary things? How do we explain a passing thought, a decaying leaf, or a human life?
The logic demonstrates that God is the efficient cause of everything, not just the essence of things, but their actual existence. Everything is determined by the necessity of the divine nature.
Which brings us to Proposition 28, presenting a deeply sobering reality. Every single finite thing, you, me, a specific thought, a physical object, is determined to exist and act by another finite cause.
And that finite cause was determined by another, and that one by another, stretching back endlessly into infinity. We are not self-caused.
We are links in an endless, unbreakable chain of finite cause and effect. And this entire infinite chain of finite modifications is governed, inherently and necessarily, by the infinite substance.
God is the remote cause of individual things only in the sense that they are mediated by this infinite chain of modes, but since everything is in God, nothing is truly remote.
This forces us into the heavy realization of Proposition 29. In nature, there is no such thing as contingency. There are no accidents. There is no randomness.
The idea that something just happened or that a situation could have been otherwise is an illusion born of our limited perception.
Everything is determined to exist and operate in a highly specific way by the absolute necessity of the divine nature. To organize this reality, Propositions 30 and 31 implicitly draw upon a critical distinction.
Right, natrans, and naturata. We can translate natron as naturing nature. This refers to God, the active, infinite substance in its attributes, acting freely by its own eternal necessity.
It is the creative, generative principle of reality. And then there is naturata, or natured nature. This refers to everything that inevitably follows from God.
All the modes, the entire physical universe, all human beings, all individual thoughts. If we rely on a metaphor, think of the difference between a dancer and the specific dance being performed.
Naturans is the dancer and the pure, eternal act of moving. Naturata is the choreography, the specific shapes, steps, and expressions that are inevitably produced by that movement.
The profound humbling occurs when this logic is applied directly to the human mind. The text states that the actual intellect, whether finite or infinite, must comprehend the attributes and modes of God and nothing else.
But more critically, in Propositions 31 and 32, this rigid determinism swallows the human intellect and the human will. Our desires, our intellect, our choices, they all belong entirely to naturata.
They are just modes. They are just the temporary waves on the surface of the infinite ocean. The ultimate takeaway from this first block of geometry is that the human will is not a free cause. It is a necessary one.
You walk around every day feeling as though you are making free, independent choices. You feel you chose to listen to this philosophy. You feel you choose what to eat or what to think about next.
But the text argues that you only feel you're making free choices because you are conscious of your desires and your actions, while remaining entirely ignorant of the infinite chain of deep underlying causes that determine those desires in the first place.
We feel free because we cannot see the invisible threads pulling our minds. Your will is determined by a cause, which is determined by another cause backward into an infinite past.
To claim that a human being possesses a free will that operates outside the necessary, determined laws of nature is an absurdity within this geometric system.
It would be akin to a single wave on the ocean claiming it independently decides when and where to crash onto the shore, completely ignoring the gravitational pull of the moon, the force of the wind, and the deep ocean currents that actually propel it forward.
As we maintain this quiet contemplation, we realize we have moved incredibly far from our initial understanding of reality. We have been methodically walked away from seeing ourselves as isolated, independent individuals making random choices in a chaotic, unpredictable universe.
We are now asked to see ourselves as necessary, interconnected expressions within a singular, infinite reality. We are the inevitable ripples in the ocean of substance.
This structural shift requires you to hold a very specific question in your mind. If you truly absorb the logic of these 32 propositions, if every single action you take, every passing thought, and every deep desire you have ever felt is merely a link in an infinite, mathematically determined chain of necessity.
If absolutely nothing in the entire universe could possibly be any other way than exactly how it is right now.
What does that mean for the regrets you carry about your past? What does that mean for the intense anxieties you hold about your future?
If we truly internalize this absolute necessity, this unbroken geometric perfection of all things, it suggests a profound shift in our emotional reality. Relieving ourselves of the impossible burden of an independent free will does not necessarily lead to a dark despair, but perhaps to a profound, unshakable peace, a quiet surrender to the necessity of the universe. To understand the actual mechanics of this peace, however, and how we are supposed to live within it, we must shift our gaze from God to the human mind and examine exactly how this infinite substance expresses itself in the mental realms we experience every second.
And when you really sit with that, I mean, the sheer scale of it is almost dizzying. Just looking at the flames here in the fireplace, you realize we are standing right at a profound threshold.
We really are.
We've spent our time so far unraveling the overarching nature of the universe. What the author of this remarkable book, Spinoza, defines interchangeably as God or nature, that infinite singular reality.
Right, those cold cosmic heights.
Exactly. But now, the journey through this book brings us down from those heights. We are about to bridge the gap from the vast, infinite universe directly into the origins of your own mind.
Which is a massive shift in perspective.
It is. And our mission for this part of the conversation is actually incredibly practical. We are trying to understand how letting go of our own egos and seeing the universe for what it really is can actually free us from the everyday anxieties and frustrations that weigh us down.
That is the ultimate goal here. But before we cross that threshold into the human mind, we have to establish a vital ground rule. To truly grasp what this book is laying out, you have to do something that goes against every instinct in your body.
Okay, lay it on me.
You have to completely let go of your human-centric ego.
which is definitely easier said than done.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. You have to strip away the comforting everyday assumptions you make about how your life works, how your choices matter, and instead force yourself to view the universe through a lens of absolute, uncompromising mathematical necessity.
Let's slowly unpack that idea of mathematical necessity, because it really forms the bedrock of everything Spinoza is arguing. He makes this claim that radically shifts how we view existence. He states that things could not have been produced in any other way, or in any other order than they were.
Everything we see, everything we experience is entirely necessary.
Right.
It is a staggering thought to internalize. The argument is that if the universe were even slightly different, say if you had chosen a different shirt this morning.
Or, if a single drop of rain fell a millimeter to the left of where it actually landed.
Exactly. If any of that happened, the fundamental nature of the universe itself would have to be completely different. And because the universe exists as a perfect, necessary expression of its own essence, it cannot be different.
Because to say the universe could have been made differently is to say the ultimate nature of reality could be different.
Which is a logical contradiction.
Wait, let me push back on that a little bit, because we live in the 21st century. What about modern physics? We are taught today, especially in fields like quantum mechanics, that certain things at the subatomic level are genuinely random. Does this 17th century idea of absolute predetermined necessity still hold up against the idea that the universe has built-in randomness?
It's a fantastic question, and it strikes right at the heart of how we define our terms. Spinoza would argue that what we call randomness or chance is not an actual feature of the universe. It is simply a confession of our own ignorance. We use the word random as a placeholder for causes we do not yet understand or cannot measure. Even in the realm of quantum mechanics, where outcomes appear probabilistic to our instruments, Spinoza's framework would suggest that there is a deeper, infinitely complex chain of necessity at play.
The universe doesn't roll dice.
To borrow a phrase from Einstein, exactly.
Yeah.
And Einstein actually deeply admired this exact philosophy.
That makes me think of an actual pair of dice. When we sit at a table and roll dice, we completely accept the outcome as random. But it's not actually random, is it? It is the precise, unavoidable result of complex physics.
Absolutely.
It's the exact force of your hand, the friction of the felt on the table.
The air resistance in the room, the microscopic starting position of the plastic cubes.
Yeah, all of it.
And the gravitational pull at that exact elevation, the temperature of the room affecting the density of the air, the tiny imperfections on the corners of the dice.
It's overwhelming when you list it all out.
If we possessed a supercomputer powerful enough to calculate all of those infinitely small interacting variables, the exact millisecond the dice left your fingers, we would know the precise outcome before they ever stopped rolling. It is mathematically predetermined by the laws of physics.
So the only reason we experience suspense, the only reason we call it a game of chance, is because our human minds are inherently limited.
Correct. We cannot see the infinite chain of causes.
So we just slap the label of coincidence or accident onto events simply because our brains aren't big enough to trace the math backward to the beginning of time.
That is the crux of it.
Okay.
And this ties directly into how the book asks us to view the power of this infinite universe. The author makes an incredibly bold claim that the universe's power is nothing other than its essence itself.
Meaning it doesn't operate on free will.
Right. It doesn't function like a human being sitting at a restaurant, looking at a menu, and deciding what to order.
We really do tend to anthropomorphize everything, don't we? We constantly project human traits onto the cosmos. We imagine this supreme architect sitting on a cloud somewhere, deliberating, weighing different options, and then deliberately deciding to create this specific version of the universe instead of another one.
We do, and that is a mindset Spinoza completely rejects. For him, the universe's power is merely its existence. Whatever is within its infinite mathematical nature to exist simply must exist. The universe isn't choosing to be, it is actualizing its own nature necessarily.
Like how a triangle necessarily has three sides. It doesn't choose to have three sides, it just is.
Exactly.
This completely reframes something I do every single day without thinking about it. In a fascinating section of the book, the author goes on the offensive against what he considers the absolute deepest, most dangerous human prejudice, the belief that the universe operates with a purpose or a goal. I think the philosophical term for this is teleology.
The teleological illusion. It is arguably the hardest cognitive bias for humans to shake. And the book explains exactly why we are so deeply infected with this belief.
Why is that?
It comes down to our own biology and our daily psychology. You and I act with goals in mind. You, the listener, are engaging with this conversation right now with a goal, perhaps to learn something new, or just to relax by the fire. We seek food to end our hunger. We build shelters to stay warm.
And because every conscious action we take is driven by an end goal, we automatically, almost subconsciously, project that exact same framework onto the silent, infinite universe.
Exactly.
It is such an easy, natural leap for the human brain to make. We look at the staggering complexity of the human eye and we say, well, the eye was designed for the purpose of seeing. We look at the sun and think it shines in order to keep crops growing.
Or conversely, let's talk about the bad thing.
Like getting a flat tire on the way to a crucial meeting, and I'm standing by the side of the road in the rain.
Shouting at the sky, feeling like the universe specifically conspired to ruin your Tuesday.
Exactly. We think the universe has an agenda.
And that feeling, that assumption that nature has an agenda, is the true origin of all superstition. When we assume the universe acts with human-like intentions, that it gets angry or pleased or vengeful, we inevitably invent invisible rulers.
We invent gods or spirits who control nature based on their shifting moods.
Yes. We start believing that if we behave perfectly, the universe will reward us with good weather, health, and a promotion at work. And if we misbehave, we will be punished with earthquakes, disease, or, yes, a flat tire on a rainy Tuesday.
But the author absolutely demolishes that idea with a very cold, hard dose of reality. He points out a fact that everyone can observe if they just look around honestly. Disasters, diseases, storms, and tragedies happen to everyone indiscriminately.
They do.
They strike the kindest, most generous people, and they strike the most wicked, cruel people completely equally. The universe simply doesn't care.
To a mind desperately seeking cosmic validation, that might sound incredibly bleak. But if you really sit with it, it is profoundly liberating.
I can see how it would be.
If you are going through a terrible time right now, if you've experienced a loss or a failure or just a string of horrible luck, this philosophy is basically giving you permission to stop blaming yourself. You don't need to think you are cursed. The universe isn't punishing you. It isn't disappointed in you. It is simply operating perfectly according to its own eternal mathematical laws.
He actually credits a specific field of study with saving humanity from drowning entirely in this purposeful, superstitious ignorance. He says mathematics showed us the way out because math doesn't care about purpose or goals.
Consider the geometry of a circle. A mathematician never asks, what is the cosmic purpose of this circle? Why does it want its circumference to be pi times its diameter?
That would be a nonsensical question.
Mathematics only cares about essence, properties, and objective verifiable truth. The author believed that this mathematical, geometrical way of thinking taught humans a completely new, objective way to look at reality. It provided a lantern to guide us out of the dark woods of superstition.
Which brings up a really uncomfortable question about how we judge that reality. If the universe has no inherent purpose, no grand design aimed at human comfort, and it's all just math, what do we do with concepts like good, evil, beauty, or ugliness? Because those feel very real to us.
They do, but the book basically says we invented them all. It argues that those concepts do not exist out there in the fabric of the cosmos. They are entirely subjective. They are merely records of how the outside world affects our specific biological makeup at any given moment.
The sensory metaphors used in the book are fantastic for illustrating this, and they really bring it down to earth. Take the sense of smell, for instance. Out there in the physical world, outside of your body, a scent is just a specific geometric structure of airborne chemicals floating through space. That's all it physically is.
Right.
But when those chemicals enter a human nose and hit the olfactory nerves, our brain reacts.
And depending on how those nerves fire, we apply a label.
Well, I shouldn't say exactly, because it's completely subjective. It's like how some people think cilantro tastes and smells like a vibrant, fresh herb, and to others, like me, unfortunately, it tastes like a mouthful of dish soap.
Or think about the smell of gasoline or a wet dog. Some people actually find those smells comforting, while others gag. The stench or the perfume isn't an objective property of the chemicals floating in the air. It's just a localized report on our own nervous system's unique reaction to those chemicals.
Logic applies to every sense we have. Think about sound. Music, objectively speaking, is just vibrating air molecules. When those vibrations hit our human eardrums in a mathematically proportionate way, our specific auditory system finds it soothing, and we call it harmony.
But when the vibrations are irregular and chaotic, our system is physically stressed, and we call it noise. But to the silent universe itself, there is no harmony or noise. There is only moving air. A bat or a dog would experience those exact same vibrations entirely differently.
It really humbles you. It makes you realize that even our grandest concepts of order and chaos are just illusions. We look at a perfectly aligned, manicured row of trees in a park, and we say, look at the beautiful order. Then we look at a wild, overgrown, tangled jungle, and we say, what absolute chaos.
We only call something orderly when our human brain can easily perceive, process, and categorize it. We call it chaotic when our brain struggles to imagine the pattern.
So beauty and order do not exist in the universe itself.
Therefore, order and beauty do not exist independently in the universe. They are nothing more than reflections of our human imagination and our temporary physical state. We are essentially walking around pasting our own mental post-it notes onto an indifferent, mathematically perfect universe, and then tricking ourselves into believing those notes were there all along.
Okay, so having completely shattered our human-centric egos, I realize we live in a necessary, purposeless, entirely neutral universe where our ideas of beauty and chaos are just biological reactions. The book finally makes its grand transition.
We step across the threshold into the second major movement of the text. We move from the vast, infinite universe down to something equally mysterious, the nature of the human mind.
This is where the philosopher acts as our quiet guide, leading us toward the actual pursuit of human happiness. But to take this inward journey, we have to precisely define the elements we are working with. We need to establish exactly what we're dealing with when we talk about human existence.
Let's look at those building blocks, and let's take our time with them, because the terminology can be tricky. He defines a body, which, importantly, isn't just a human body, but any physical object at all. A rock, a tree, a chair.
A body is simply a mode that expresses the universe's existence in physical space, or what he calls the attribute of extension.
Then on the other side, he defines an idea, which is a mental concept formed by the mind, existing in the attribute of thought.
It is crucial to pay very close attention to the specific phrasing used here. The author explicitly distinguishes an idea from a mere perception. He notes that the word perception implies a passive state, as if the mind is just a blank movie screen that physical objects project themselves onto.
But he insists the mind is incredibly active. An idea is an action of the thinking mind. It is something the mind actively forms and constructs, not just something it passively receives from the outside world.
And this brings us to one of the most famous and, frankly, mind-bending concepts in the book, the dual attributes. We have the physical world of space and matter, extension, and we have the mental world of ideas, thought. In this philosophical system, these aren't two separate universes magically interacting with each other.
They are just two different ways of looking at the exact same infinite reality. This is arguably one of the most profound leaps in the entire text. It leads to his core theorem regarding the mind and body. The order and connection of ideas is the exact same as the order and connection of things.
Let's really visualize this, because it's a massive departure from how we usually think about ourselves. Imagine you are sitting in a massive, dark movie theater. Up in the projection booth, you have the video track, the literal light beaming through the digital file to create moving images on the screen.
And then all around you, you have the audio track, the booming surround sound coming from the speakers.
Now, within the technology of that theater, the moving pictures of an explosion on screen do not cause the speakers to vibrate and make a booming sound. And the sound waves from the speakers do not cause the light on the screen to change color. They are completely separate, parallel tracks of data.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. The visual track and the audio track never touch. They never causally interact. But they run in absolutely perfect, unbreakable synchronization.
Because they are both expressions of the exact same underlying digital file. They're two different attributes of the exact same movie.
And the book is arguing that our reality, our very existence, works exactly like that movie theater. The physical world of bodies moving around in space and the mental world of ideas and thoughts floating in the mind run perfectly parallel to one another.
This is a strict, uncompromising rule of cause and effect.
Physical bodies can only cause other physical bodies to move, a rock hitting another rock. And ideas can only cause other ideas, a thought leading to a logical conclusion.
So the physical realm and the mental realm are completely causally sealed off from one another. A purely abstract thought cannot magically reach out and move a physical atom in your brain, and a physical atom cannot reach across the void and generate an abstract mental concept.
Yet they correspond perfectly, beat for beat, because they are rooted in the same singular reality, just expressed through these two different lenses.
That completely redefines how we have to think about our own lives. It takes us right out of the center of the universe. The author unpacks this startling realization: a human being is not an independent substance. We do not exist independently on our own, floating through the void.
We are so deeply conditioned by our senses to feel like independent agents, entirely separate from the environment around us. We feel like the authors of our own isolated story.
But mathematically, logically, he proves we are merely tiny, temporary expressions or modes of the universe's infinite attributes. We're just a fleeting physical shape within the infinite space of extension and a fleeting mental concept within the infinite realm of thought.
It's like a wave on the surface of the ocean. The wave peaks, and for a few seconds, it might think it's an individual, independent thing. It has a shape, it has momentum.
But it's really just a temporary behavior, a brief geometric expression of the entire ocean. It was never separate from the water. We are just waves in the infinite reality of nature.
That is a beautiful way to frame it. And what's truly fascinating is that this concept even applies to things that don't physically exist right now. The text explores the geometry of non-existent things.
It argues that the ideas of things that haven't even been built or haven't even been born yet are still perfectly contained within the infinite universe.
He uses this elegant geometric metaphor for this that I loved. Imagine a perfectly drawn circle on a piece of paper. By the sheer mathematical laws that govern that circle, there are an infinite number of potential intersecting rectangles that could be perfectly drawn inside of it.
Now, those rectangles do not physically exist yet. No one has taken a pencil and drawn them.
But the idea of them, the perfect, unchangeable mathematical truth of their intersecting proportions, is eternally contained within the nature of that circle.
So the infinite mind of the universe, this infinite attribute of thought, contains the perfect, orderly ideas of everything that could possibly exist.
And out of all of that staggering infinite complexity, we finally arrive at his ultimate definition of our own consciousness. What exactly is the human mind?
The answer provided is brilliantly simple, yet incredibly dense when you try to unpack it. The conclusion is that the human mind is nothing more and nothing less than the specific idea of a uniquely existing thing. And that thing is your physical human body.
The mind is simply the universe's idea of your specific physical body. That is its entire essence, its entire reason for being. But if the mind is just the idea of the body, and as we established with the movie theater analogy, the physical realm and the mental realm run on perfectly parallel tracks, entirely sealed off from one another.
What actually happens when that physical body experiences sudden trauma, or immense physical pain, or overwhelming physical joy?
If the physical wound on your arm cannot literally cross the barrier to cause a mental thought of pain in the realm of ideas, how do they communicate so instantly and perfectly?
Understanding the precise mechanics of that exact, mysterious connection isn't just philosophical trivia. If we follow this logic to its absolute end, solving that parallel mystery is the only true key to unlocking actual human freedom. So we really need to lean right into how this connection actually operates, because once you see the underlying mechanism,
When you open the book we're examining today, you're immediately struck by just how profoundly meticulous it is. It offers this incredibly logical deconstruction of human existence, the fundamental nature of the universe, and exactly how our rather fragile minds connect to the vast reality around us. Our focus for this specific phase of our journey is to understand an unbreakable mechanical link. We're looking closely at the literal connection between the human mind and the physical human body. We really want to understand how our most basic, everyday physical interactions generate everything we experience, our memories, our deeply held illusions, and ultimately the steep but rewarding path to true knowledge.
yeah, and to understand anything about our thoughts, our feelings, or, the intricate workings of our inner lives, the book asks us to do something quite difficult right out of the gate. It forces us to first strip away all our romantic notions about the mind. We are asked to look strictly at physics. We must examine the stark geometry of physical bodies colliding in space. It's a very quiet, yet incredibly radical starting point. The author insists that we simply cannot comprehend the mind without first mapping out the exact mechanical realities of the physical world it inhabits.
Right, which sets up one of the book's most striking initial claims. The text describes the human mind essentially as just one small part of an infinite intellect, but more specifically, it claims the mind's primary fundamental object, the only thing it is truly focused on, is the realistically existing human body. Why does the author anchor the mind so strictly to our physical form?
The reasoning is deeply methodical. Think about what would happen if our minds did not have our specific individual bodies as their primary object. We simply wouldn't be able to feel or perceive any of the physical changes happening to us. When you touch a cold window pane or when you feel the warmth of the sun on your arm, your mind perceives those things precisely because your mind is, in essence, the idea of your body.
So if the mind were somehow disconnected from the physical state of the body, those sensations would just...
They would just float in a void, completely detached from our awareness.
Okay, so if the mind is fundamentally just the idea of the body, we really cannot go any further without asking a very basic question. What exactly is a body according to this text? How does the author define the physical universe we're constantly interacting with?
The text argues that everything in the universe consists of bodies. But the analysis here is fascinating. These bodies are not distinguished from one another by what they are made of. The author argues that their underlying substance is all exactly the same. Instead, bodies are distinguished entirely by their state of motion or rest, and whether they move quickly or slowly.
Just motion and rest. That implies a universe that is entirely kinetic. How does that translate to the complex things we see around us? For instance, how does the book explain a composite body, like a tree or a human being?
The book uses a very elegant analogy of simple bodies combining to form composite bodies. Imagine countless tiny simple bodies moving together in a localized area. As long as the parts within this composite body maintain the exact same ratio of motion and rest to one another, the overall body retains its distinct identity.
So it's about the pattern, not the...
Not the pieces, precisely. This remains true even if the individual parts are constantly being replaced, or if the body grows larger or smaller. Think of it like a waterfall.
Oh, right, because the water is constantly moving.
Exactly. The water molecules are completely changing every single second, but the waterfall retains its shape and identity because the motion and the structure remain constant. The defining characteristic is not the specific physical particles, but the enduring rhythm and proportion of their movement.
Wow. And if we follow that logic and keep scaling it up, the text leads us to a rather breathtaking conclusion. If simple bodies combine to make larger bodies, and those combine to make even larger ones like ecosystems or planets, eventually, the entire universe is revealed to be one single, massive, individual body.
It is a profound perspective. The total sum of reality is one unified physical system. The internal parts of this universal body are constantly shifting, colliding, degrading, and transforming. But the universe as a whole never undergoes any change in its fundamental shape or nature, because the total ratio of motion and rest across the entire infinite system remains perfectly balanced.
And within that infinite balanced system, we find the highly complex human body. The book explains that our bodies are composed of a multitude of parts. The text uses 17th century terminology, describing them as fluid, soft, and hard parts. To simply sustain itself, this delicate structure requires constant interaction with external bodies. We have to breathe the air, eat food, and physically navigate our environment endlessly just to maintain our physical structure.
Yeah, and because our bodies are in this constant necessary state of interaction, the author draws a direct correlation to our intelligence. Our mind's capacity to perceive things is directly proportional to how many different ways our body can be stimulated. The more complex our physical interactions, the more capable our mind becomes.
But the text introduces a very important catch here about how we perceive things. When we look at an object, we usually assume we are seeing the object exactly as it is. But the book argues that our idea of an external object is actually a mixture, doesn't it?
Yes, and this is crucial. Our perception is never a pure reflection of the outside world. Because we only know the world through the impacts it makes on our body, our perception always contains the nature of our own body inextricably combined with the nature of the external object. We never see the world from a neutral viewpoint. We only ever experience our own physical tissues reacting to the world.
That brings us to how the book explains memory, which I found fascinating. If everything is just bodies colliding, what is a memory? When I remember my childhood home or a conversation from yesterday, what is physically happening according to this framework?
The author provides a strictly mechanical explanation. The book talks about those fluid parts being pushed by external forces, like light reflecting off an object, or sound waves and crashing into the soft parts of our internal tissues. This physical impact leaves actual indentations or physical traces. Now, obviously, this is the author's early understanding of biology.
Right, it sounds a bit archaic at first glance.
It does. But if you map this onto modern neuroscience, the idea of neural pathways and synapses firing and strengthening through repetition, the author was incredibly ahead of their time. The concept remains the same. Later on, when the fluids of the body naturally circulate and happen to strike those exact same physical traces again, the mind remembers. It imagines the external object as if it were standing right in front of us at this very moment. Memory, in this view, is quite literally a physical scar being repeatedly touched.
It makes the act of remembering feel so tactile. And this mechanical trace system explains the habit of association. The book illustrates this with some incredibly concrete examples. It shows how memory is really just a chain reaction of these physical traces linked together entirely by our personal habits. Can you walk us through the analogy of the soldier and the farmer?
Sure, imagine a soldier and a farmer are walking together, and they come across the exact same sight horse tracks left in the sand. The physical stimulus hitting their eyes is identical. But because of the habitual physical traces uniquely carved into the soldier's body, the image of the horse tracks immediately forces his internal fluids to strike the traces associated with a horse, which then strike the traces of a knight, which inevitably leads his mind to the concept of war.
Meanwhile, the farmer sees those exact same tracks, but his physical traces are organized differently based on his life. His mind moves from the horse to a plow and then to a field.
Exactly. To put it in a modern context, imagine a chef and a mechanic walking down the street and seeing a dark puddle of oil on the asphalt. The mechanic might instantly think of a failing engine, maybe feeling a spike of stress about repair costs. The chef might just see a mess that reminds them of a kitchen spill, moving their thoughts to a ruined sauce. The physical puddle is identical, but the external reality is filtered through internal physical habit, dictating an entirely different reality in their minds.
The book adds another layer to this with the analogy of a simple word, like apple. It notes that the physical sound of the spoken word has absolutely no natural similarity to the actual sweet, round fruit.
None whatsoever. There is nothing about the sound waves of the word that resembles the taste or shape of the fruit. Yet when you hear that specific sound, your mind instantly conjures the image. This happens for no other reason than the fact that your body has habitually experienced both stimuli at the same time in the past. The physical traces of the sound and the fruit were carved simultaneously into your tissues, so activating one automatically activates the other. It's a biological chain reaction.
If our minds are just reading these physical, habitual traces, how does the text handle the concept of being wrong? We all make mistakes or hold false beliefs, but the book has a very radical definition of error and illusion. It argues that there is no such thing as an actively false idea.
This is where the philosophy becomes incredibly forgiving in a way. In the grand scope of the infinite intellect, everything is true. Falsity, as we experience it, is purely a privation. It's simply a lack of complete information. You never actively hold a false idea. You just hold a true idea that is missing its context.
The book unpacks this beautifully, using the example of looking at the sun. Think about the last time you looked up at the sky. You perceive the sun as a small disk located maybe 200 feet away in the air. The author points out that this perception is not a mistake made by your eyes.
Right. Your body is accurately and truthfully registering the specific, limited way the sun's light is interacting with your physical form. Your eyes are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. The falsity only occurs because we lack the adequate mathematical knowledge that the sun is actually a massive star positioned over 600 Earth diameters away.
And what is truly fascinating here is what happens after we learn the truth. Even when we study astronomy and mathematically prove the sun's distance, we will still physically see it as being 200 feet away when we look up.
Because learning the truth does not erase the physical trace in our body. The physical impact of the light hasn't changed, so the immediate perception remains exactly the same. But it's no longer an error because we have added the missing context to our minds. Falsity vanishes not when the physical image changes, but when the ignorance is removed.
This concept of ignorance brings us to the book's boldest and perhaps most challenging claim about human psychology, the illusion of free will. If every thought is just an internal fluid hitting a physical trace, where is the room for choice? The text asserts that humans walk through life believing they are totally independently free. But this belief is fundamentally an illusion born of that same privation we just talked about.
We think we are free solely because we're highly conscious of our desires, our impulses, and our actions. We feel the desire, so we assume we authored it. Yet at the exact same time, we are completely ignorant of the underlying complex web of physical and environmental causes that mechanically force us to want those things in the first place.
We are entirely blind to the countless microscopic collisions of bodies, the fluids hitting the soft parts, the external stimuli shaping our traces over decades that actually built our preferences. It's a bit like being incredibly angry and not realizing it is simply because you haven't eaten lunch.
That is a perfect way to look at it. And the author points out the social consequence of this illusion. When a person doesn't understand the deeply rooted physical causes behind why they or others act the way they do, they are left perpetually confused. Instead of seeking to understand the mechanical nature of human behavior, this ignorance makes people prone to judging and mocking others. They view human actions as spontaneous moral failures, rather than the inevitable results of complex physical histories.
Let's pivot slightly to how this mechanical limitation affects the way we organize the world. You and I and everyone listening are bombarded with information every single day. What happens to our physical brain and body when we see too many things at once? The book explains that the physical capacity of our internal tissues to maintain distinct, separate traces for every single thing is completely overwhelmed.
There simply isn't enough physical space, to use a metaphor, to keep every detail sharp. When these physical traces overlap and crash into each other, a physical blurring occurs within the body. And from this biological blurring, we create what the book calls transcendental terms, words like being, thing, or entity.
The mind just lumps it all together because the body can't hold the distinct impressions.
Exactly. Furthermore, this same overwhelming of our physical capacity creates universal ideas, such as the general concept of a human, a horse, or a dog. We cannot hold the distinct, sharp image of every single human being we have ever seen in our entire lives. So the countless traces blur together into a single, generalized, vague image of a human.
And because these universal concepts are formed by physical blurring, the book proves they are completely unavoidably subjective. Everyone's physical traces have blurred in a uniquely personal way based on what they've encountered. Because of this, everyone defines the universal concept of a human differently, based entirely on whatever specific physical aspect struck their body most often and left the deepest trace.
One person who frequently observed posture might define a human merely as a featherless biped. Another person, whose deepest physical traces are linked to social interactions, might define a human as a laughing animal. Yet another might insist a human is primarily a rational creature.
It reminds me of the endless arguments you see on the internet today about the definition of almost any word. Each person fiercely believes they are arguing an objective truth, but according to this text, they are actually just describing their own personal biological blur.
The text notes with quiet irony that this simple physical limitation of our tissues is the true cause of so many heated, endless philosophical arguments. We are essentially arguing over, well, blurred scars.
Okay, we've established how deeply flawed and subjective our standard everyday perceptions are, but the author doesn't leave us stranded there. The book maps out human thought, organizing our mental capacities into three very distinct kinds of knowledge. It shows us exactly how we can climb out of the biological blur. Can you break down these three tiers for us?
Certainly. The first kind of knowledge is what the text calls opinion or imagination. This is the baseline state we have been discussing this whole time. It is knowledge gained entirely through fragmented, confused, and random everyday experiences. It's also knowledge gained through mere signs, such as hearing words spoken or reading text on a page.
So, relying entirely on the traces and the habits.
Yes, and the book is incredibly explicit here. This first kind of knowledge is the one and only cause of falsity and error in the human mind, because it's purely reliant on how the universe randomly bumped into your specific body.
To move beyond error, we must reach the second kind of knowledge, which the book calls reason. This tier doesn't rely on subjective memories or blurred images. Instead, it relies on common notions. These are fundamental properties that are equally present in the smallest part of a thing and in the whole of a thing.
Concepts like physical extension, the mere fact that something takes up space, or the fundamental laws of motion and rest we discussed earlier. Because these common notions are structurally true everywhere in the universe, regardless of your personal habits, knowledge based on them is always adequate and logically true.
But there is a summit even higher than reason. The third kind of knowledge is intuitive knowledge. This is not a slow, mechanical deduction.
No, it's an immediate, profound, and flawless grasp of reality. It's the ability to intuitively see how the unique essence of a single specific thing logically and directly flows outward from the infinite, eternal attributes of the universe itself. It's seeing the whole and the part instantly.
To really make this concrete, the book provides a brilliant, simple mathematical example. Imagine a merchant who is given three numbers, let's say 1, 2, and 3, and is asked to find the fourth proportional number. They need to find the number that relates to 3 in the exact same way that 2 relates to 1. Think about how you would solve that.
A person operating strictly on the first kind of knowledge opinion will simply take the second number, multiply by the third, and divide by the first. They do this mechanically purely because a teacher told them to do it that way once. They've memorized a rule through habit, just like the soldier remembering the horse, but they have absolutely no idea why the mathematical rule actually works.
Right. Now, a person operating on the second kind of knowledge reason will arrive at the same answer, but their internal process is completely different. They understand the universal proofs. They might utilize the axioms of Euclid regarding proportions. They understand the underlying logical structure that guarantees the answer is correct across all possible numbers. They know the why.
But the person operating on the third kind of knowledge, intuitive knowledge, does something else entirely. They do not blindly follow a memorized rule, nor do they need to slowly work through the universal proofs of Euclid. They simply look at the numbers 1, 2, and 3, and they instantly intuitively see the ratio. They know, with absolute clarity, that just as 1 is naturally to 2, 3 is naturally to 6. The essence of the proportion is immediately visible to them without any mechanical intermediary.
It is a profound progression from blindness to understanding to immediate clarity. As we reflect on this deeply mechanical yet strangely beautiful architecture of the mind, a very quiet, perhaps slightly isolating question begins to surface for you to ponder. If every single thing we imagine, every memory we hold dear, and every baseline belief we fiercely defend is fundamentally just a physical trace, a biological scar left on our soft internal tissues by the chaotic universe crashing into us over a lifetime, does that mean every single human being is literally living inside an entirely custom-built, isolated physical reality crafted solely by their unique sequence of collisions?
To realize that your entire perceived world is uniquely scarred into your own tissues is a deeply isolating thought, yeah. It suggests a profound loneliness in human perception. But acknowledging the strange, isolated reality of physical traces is the only way we can possibly begin to comprehend the chaotic storms of our own inner lives, leading us directly into the overwhelming mechanics of human emotion, where we are forced to finally examine how.
And as we shift from that quiet architecture of the mind right into the turbulent, overwhelming world of human emotions, it really feels as though the ground is suddenly shifting beneath us.
It does. It feels unstable.
But if we follow the philosophy laid out here in the book, we're actually asked to remain perfectly still.
Completely still.
We are moving away from simply mapping how our thoughts are constructed, and we are stepping into a space where one of our most deeply ingrained, comforting illusions, the illusion of free will, is methodically and, frankly, beautifully dismantled.
It is beautiful, and it requires a real intellectual surrender from you.
Yeah. We're being asked to look at our passions, our sudden rages, our profound loves, not as magical or unpredictable forces, but through a strictly scientific, geometric lens.
Geometric lens, exactly.
It's an invitation for you, sitting right where you are listening to this, to just quietly observe the gears of your own mind, just watching them turn without any judgment at all.
And to understand that transition into this new emotional landscape, we first have to ground ourselves in what the book establishes about the very nature of truth itself.
Right.
There's this deeply peaceful certainty presented here. It proposes that a person who holds a true idea, they simply know that they have it.
They can't doubt it.
They cannot doubt it.
Yeah.
Because truth doesn't require an external validator. There's a metaphor offered here that is just as elegant as it is absolute. Truth is its own standard, exactly in the way that light reveals both itself and the surrounding darkness.
That imagery really just stops you in your tracks.
It does.
If you ask, how do I know I am certain of a truth? It's essentially like asking, how does the light know it is shining?
Precisely. The light simply shines. It illuminates the room, and in doing so, it proves its own existence.
It just is.
The truth simply is. It doesn't require a secondary confirmation, shadow thought checking the first thought, to exist or to be fully known by the mind that holds it.
And starting from that unwavering, self-illuminating standard of truth, we're led into a direct confrontation with one of our most persistent human anxieties.
Contingency.
Contingency, this heavy, everyday feeling we all carry. The belief that the future is just this vast, open field of random possibilities.
That something might or might not happen.
Right, which is the root of so much of our suffering.
It is the root of almost all of it.
Yeah.
But if we look at this through the lens of pure reason, the universe does not operate on random chance. Reason perceives things as absolutely necessary.
Every event is the unavoidable result of a prior cause.
Exactly. This feeling of contingency, this gnawing uncertainty we have about tomorrow, is actually just a flaw in our human imagination. It's a blind spot created by our limited perception of time.
I want to break down how this works in our daily lives because there's a very specific, almost psychological example given in the book about how our minds associate time and memory.
The boy and the men he sees.
Yeah, the young boy. So imagine this boy usually sees a man named Peter in the morning, a man named Paul at noon, and a man named Simon in the evening. Because of the sheer repetition of this routine, the boy's mind intrinsically connects the mental images of those specific men to those specific times of day.
Right, his mind builds a sort of internal psychological clock based purely on habit.
Habit.
But then suppose one evening the routine breaks.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing Simon, the boy sees a completely different man, James.
Right?
The next day, as evening approaches, the boy's imagination begins to waver. He pictures the evening, but he doesn't know whether to associate it with Simon or with James.
His mind fluctuates between the two images.
Because his past experiences are suddenly in conflict.
And that fluctuation is everything. That wavering, that anxious oscillation about what the future holds, that is exactly what we mistakenly label as contingency.
We project our own internal confusion onto the universe.
We think reality itself is undecided, when in fact it's only our own limited imagination that's bouncing back and forth, entirely because we lack the complete chain of causes.
We only see a fraction of the machinery. So the question is, how do we escape that anxiety?
Oh, right.
The book introduces this breathtaking concept, perceiving the world sub quodam specie eternitatis, under a certain form of eternity.
That phrase feels so massive. What does it actually mean to view our daily chaotic lives under a form of eternity?
Think of looking at a single drop of rain falling on your shoulder.
Okay.
If you only look at that one drop in isolation, it seems entirely random that it fell exactly there, at exactly that moment.
Just bad luck.
Just bad luck. But if you could step back and perceive the entire atmospheric system, the global pressure fronts, the evaporation cycles spanning the oceans over millennia, you would realize that single drop had to fall exactly on your shoulder at that exact millisecond.
It was a mathematical inevitability.
Yes. Perceiving the world under the form of eternity means understanding that every single idea, every existing body, necessarily involves the infinite and eternal essence of nature itself.
Nothing is isolated.
Nothing is random.
We are necessary expressions of an eternal reality. But if everything is so perfectly necessary, why do we humans mess up so much?
It's a fair point.
I mean, why is our history just a catalog of errors and misunderstandings?
It's a crucial question. The argument here is that the root of our error isn't that reality is broken, or even that our minds are inherently flawed. We actually possess adequate knowledge of this eternal essence deep down.
We do.
We do. The problem is that we stumble because we apply the wrong names to things, or we rely on clumsy physical habits of speech. The book gives a great geometric example. Imagine someone confidently stating that a circle has the properties of a sphere.
Which is impossible.
Completely impossible. When someone says that, they aren't actually visualizing a spherical circle in their mind. The human mind physically cannot conceive of a spherical two-dimensional object.
So what are they doing?
What is happening is that they are simply misusing words. They have severely confused their terms. The error isn't in the raw, eternal material of reality. The error is entirely in how we clumsily label and combine our fragmented perceptions.
This brings us to what I think is the most challenging threshold in this entire worldview.
The eradication of free will.
The complete eradication of absolute free will. For so many of us, the idea that we have a sovereign, independent will sitting inside our heads, pulling levers and making free choices, is the very core of our identity.
It is the ultimate comfort.
Yeah.
But this philosophy methodically strips that comfort away. It asserts, with absolute, uncompromising logic, that the mind has no free or absolute will.
None.
None. Every single decision you make, every affirmation, every fleeting desire is determined by a prior cause.
Yeah.
And that cause was determined by another and another, stretching back infinitely into the fabric of nature.
You are a profoundly complex domino in an endless line of falling dominoes. It's a heavy realization. But how does that actually work mechanically in the mind? If I don't have a separate will in making choices, what is happening when I decide something is true?
To grasp this, we have to understand that the will, which is the act of affirming or denying something, and the intellect, which is the act of understanding something, are the exact same thing.
They aren't separate.
They're not two separate departments in the brain. Think about a triangle. The act of affirming that a triangle's interior angles equal two right angles is not a separate free choice you make after you understand what a triangle is.
The affirmation is built in.
Utterly inseparable from the very idea of the triangle itself. You cannot hold the true idea of a triangle without simultaneously affirming its properties. The intellect comprehends and the will affirms simultaneously. They are one single event.
But people fiercely defend their free will. When you suggest that our choices are just inevitable dominoes falling, people immediately throw up defenses.
Of course.
I know I do. And it's fascinating how this framework anticipates those exact defenses. There are 4 major objections to this determinism that are systematically dismantled here.
They're torn apart very methodically.
Let's walk through them because it feels like watching a very tight knot being slowly undone. The first thing people argue is that our will simply must be infinite, because it feels like we can desire or will things that are far beyond what our intellect actually understands.
Yes, the feeling that our desire outpaces our knowledge. But this is exposed as a trick of the mind. We only believe our will is infinite because we have formed this abstract universal concept called affirming.
Right.
We lump all our millions of specific daily choices into one giant imaginary bucket and slap the label the will on it.
There is no bucket.
In reality, you cannot actually affirm, deny, or desire any specific thing that you haven't first perceived to some degree. Your will only extends exactly as far as your specific ideas extend. There is no phantom will floating in the void without an object to grasp.
Okay, but what about those moments where I deliberately pause? The second objection people raise is the act of suspending judgment. If someone tells me a rumor and I pause and say, I am going to withhold my judgment until I have more facts, doesn't that deliberate pause prove I have a free will standing above my thoughts?
It feels like freedom. But the explanation given here is brilliant. Suspending judgment is not a free, independent action. It is simply the natural state of inadequate perception.
Oh, so?
It illustrates this with the image of a young boy imagining a winged horse. If that boy imagines the winged horse, and his mind contains absolutely no other knowledge or experience to contradict that image, he must believe it exists.
Belief is the default state of a thought.
Exactly. He doesn't freely choose to affirm the winged horse. The idea simply asserts its own reality in his mind.
So doubt requires friction.
Yes. The only time doubt or suspended judgment arises is when a second conflicting idea is introduced. Perhaps the boy remembers that horses are mammals, and mammals don't have feathers.
No, he has a problem.
Now, he has 2 conflicting mechanical realities in his mind. The suspension of judgment is just the mechanical balancing of those conflicting ideas. It is not a free choice. It is a mental stalemate.
That completely reframes how I view my own indecision.
It changes everything.
The third objection claims that one affirmation doesn't seem to contain more reality than another. People argue that saying a true statement and saying a false statement are just equal actions of a free will choosing between 2 options.
But the book swiftly dismisses that by returning to the nature of truth. Ideas differ in their perfection and their reality exactly as their real-world objects differ. A true idea literally contains more reality, more structural perfection than a false, confused one. They are not equal weights on a scale.
And speaking of scales, that leads directly to the fourth objection, which is one of the most famous paradoxes in philosophy: Burden's ass. The skeptics ask, what happens if you take a perfectly rational man and place him exactly halfway between 2 completely equal sources of food and drink? If he lacks an independent free will to arbitrarily tip the scales, does he just stand there frozen in equilibrium and starve to death?
And the answer to this is delivered with such cold, unshakable finality.
It really is.
It states that if a man truly starves in that perfectly balanced situation, he is acting like a statue, or indeed a mindless donkey. But if he is a living, complex human being, true equilibrium is physically impossible.
Something will tip it.
Always. The intricate, infinite chain of natural causes, a slight breeze, a microscopic chemical shift in his blood, a fleeting memory, will ultimately determine his motion in one direction or the other. Complex natural systems do not freeze. Causality always tips the scale.
It is a complete paradigm shift, but I think a lot of people listening might feel a sense of dread here.
I understand that.
Why should we surrender the feeling of free will? If I'm just a complex natural system playing out a script written by causality, doesn't that lead to nihilism? Why is this a good thing?
It's the most important question to ask. And rather than leading to despair, this philosophy outlines 4 profoundly practical, life-changing benefits to accepting absolute determinism. First, it brings an incredibly deep peace of mind.
Peace of mind.
When you truly understand that you operate by universal decree, the exhausting anxiety of what if begins to dissolve. You stop torturing yourself over past decisions, recognizing they were the only decisions that could have happened given the exact causes present in that millisecond.
Second, it completely changes how we endure tragedy and fortune.
Yes.
When you know that all things follow from the eternal necessity of nature, you stop viewing bad luck as a personal punishment or as random cruelty from an uncaring universe. You see tragedies as inevitable weather patterns of reality. It builds an unshakable stoicism.
Third, and this is where it transforms our daily social lives, it logically eliminates the foundations of hatred, envy, anger, and resentment.
I really want to pause on this one. How does giving up free will cure hatred?
Think about a time you received a deeply cruel, angry text message from someone. In the moment, you are furious because you believe they freely, sovereignly chose to be malicious.
Right. They decided to hurt me.
But if you view them through this deterministic lens, you realize they are not a free agent choosing to be cruel. They are the unavoidable result of their own biology, their past traumas, their current stress converging in that moment. They're a thunderstorm.
Wow.
You might take shelter from a thunderstorm, you might protect yourself, but you don't hate the clouds, you don't resent the rain. By removing the illusion of free authorship, your anger literally has nowhere to attach itself. It dissolves into a calm, rational desire to help or understand rather than a desire to punish.
That is incredibly liberating. And the fourth benefit scales that up to the level of society. It benefits the very structure of the state, teaching citizens to act not out of the slavish fear of punishment, but freely, in the truest rational sense of the word, out of a clear understanding of what is fundamentally best for the interconnected whole.
It's a vision of a society bound by shared reason rather than shared fear.
And this beautiful, challenging realization brings us to a critical threshold in our exploration. Having mapped the inevitable geometry of the mind, we now turn the same unblinking analytical gaze upon human emotions.
Entering the geometry of emotions.
As we enter this next phase, there is a powerful critique leveled at centuries of past thinkers. The argument is that for far too long, philosophers have treated human beings as though we lived entirely outside the laws of nature. They viewed humanity as a dominion within a dominion.
A dominion within a dominion.
We act like we have a VIP pass that exempts us from physics. Past writers looked at human behavior and preferred to mock it, to curse it, to laugh at it, or to weep over our flaws. They viewed our irrationality as a bizarre, unnatural deviation from some perfect divine order.
But the proposal here is beautifully radical. It insists on treating human appetites, emotions, and frailties exactly as if they were lines, planes, and solid bodies in geometry.
Geometry again.
Always geometry. The underlying premise is that nature's laws are identical everywhere. There are no exceptions for the human ego. The agonizing grip of jealousy, the sudden flight of fear, the warmth of affection, these are as natural, as necessary, and as mathematically determined as a thunderstorm rolling across the plains.
Yeah.
To understand them, we must map them with the exact same objective meteorological clarity.
To do this, we are given three foundational definitions, laid out with crystalline precision. First, an action. An action only occurs when we are the adequate cause of what happens, meaning when a change in us can be completely and entirely understood through our own internal nature alone.
Conversely, there is a passion, a passive state. This happens when we are only the partial cause of what happens to us. It is when external forces, the weather of the world around us, act upon us and sweep us up.
And finally, the central definition that will guide everything moving forward, an affect, or what we would call an emotion. An emotion is defined simply as a state that either increases or decreases the body's physical power to act, simultaneously accompanied by the mental idea of that bodily state.
Notice the phrasing there. The body's physical power, simultaneously accompanied by the mental idea.
Mind and body.
Mind and body moving in absolute tandem. This brings us face to face with the most startling revelation yet, the absolute wall between the mind and the body.
This is where my intuition just screams in protest. We are taught here that the body cannot make the mind think, and the mind, despite our deepest, most visceral feelings, cannot make the body move.
They cannot interact.
They're identically the same thing, the exact same natural event, simply expressed in two entirely different ways. One is expressed through the attribute of thought, and the other through the attribute of extension or physical matter.
It is notoriously difficult to grasp because it so directly challenges our lived experience. A good way to visualize this parallelism is to think of a song being played on a piano while simultaneously being written out as sheet music.
Okay.
The notes appearing on the paper aren't causing the piano keys to physically press down. And the moving piano keys aren't physically drawing the ink on the paper.
They are independent.
They're the exact same song, happening simultaneously in two completely different mediums. The mind is the music, the body is the piano.
But I firmly believe that my conscious mind commands my hand to lift this cup of coffee. People argue that without the mind's active dictatorial command, the physical body would be completely inert, just a lifeless lump of matter.
And the counter-argument to that is to expose our profound ignorance of the body's actual hidden mechanical genius. We honestly do not know what the physical body is capable of doing strictly through the laws of physics and biology.
But me don't.
The author points to a phenomenon we still marvel at today to prove this. Sleepwalkers.
It's the perfect silver bullet. A sleepwalker, who is completely devoid of any conscious mental command or awareness, can navigate a complex house, balance on a staircase, unlock doors, and perform incredibly intricate actions.
Exactly.
It proves undeniably that the body operates on its own sophisticated, entirely physical mechanics. It is capable of astonishing navigation without any conscious permission or direction from the waking mind.
And from this undeniable biological fact, we unpack the ultimate, perhaps the most devastating human illusion. Humans are so firmly, aggressively convinced that they are free for one simple, tragic reason. We are intensely, continuously conscious of our own appetites and desires, yet we are totally, blindly ignorant of the underlying physical and environmental causes that actually dictate those desires.
We feel the urge, and because we don't see the million invisible strings pulling us, we claim authorship of the urge. We hear these profound examples of human self-deception in the book, and it is impossible not to recognize ourselves in them. It points to the infant, crying out, who genuinely believes it is freely, consciously choosing to crave the milk.
As adults, we laugh at that.
But then we defend our own adult reactions just as fiercely.
It points to the angry boy, flushed with heat and adrenaline, who believes he is freely choosing to seek revenge. It points to the coward on the battlefield, who thinks his sudden urge to flee is a calculated free choice of the will, rather than the mechanical takeover of his nervous system.
And perhaps the most revealing, uncomfortable example, the drunkard. The drunkard sits at the table, babbling continuously, firmly believing that he is speaking freely, that his words are the product of his uninhibited sovereign mind.
We've all seen it.
It's exactly like when we send a furious text message late at night. In that moment, we feel so righteous, so free in our choice of words. But when the alcohol fades, or when we wake up the next morning and the adrenaline has cleared, we look back with deep regret.
We do.
We realize, after the fact, that our free speech was nothing more than the mechanical dictation of the chemical state of our body.
It is a profoundly humbling synthesis. The decisions of the mind, the agonizing choices we deliberate over, the words we hurl at each other in anger, they're nothing more than the physical appetites of the body manifesting themselves in the realm of thought.
Mind and body together.
They arise together and they fall together. What we are witnessing in ourselves is an unbroken, eternal chain of natural causes expressing itself physically as motion and mentally as desire.
If every tear we shed, every sudden laugh that escapes us, and every shout of anger is as geometrically determined as the angles of a triangle, if our minds and our bodies are moving in perfect involuntary synchronization as parallel expressions of an infinite, unyielding natural law, it leaves us standing on the edge of a very profound, lingering question. In a universe where absolutely everything is meticulously, unavoidably caused, what does it actually mean for you to become active rather than merely passive in the living of your own life? So as we move quietly but directly into the very architecture of human emotion, and keep in mind, since this is part 5 of our 10-part journey through this book, we are deep into the mapping of the human soul now.
Right. A subtle but profound shift happens here in how we have to look at ourselves.
Yeah. And if you're sitting here with us listening to this, you have to realize that the emotions you feel as you move through your day, the quiet moments of joy, the lingering sorrows, the complicated hatreds you might harbor, they aren't treated here as messy, irrational flaws.
There are moral failings. You don't just have to suffer through them or suppress them.
They are natural phenomena. They are governed by logical rules, as steady and predictable as the laws that govern lines, planes, and bodies in a geometric proof.
We are essentially looking at the physics of feeling. In this specific stage of the philosophy, we're examining how intimately our minds and our bodies strive simply to exist.
And how the outside world is constantly manipulating that striving.
Exactly. It begins with understanding a fundamental boundary within the mind itself. There is a distinction made here between an active mind and a passive mind.
Which is crucial.
It is. Your mind is considered active when it holds what this book calls adequate ideas. These are clear, logical truths that stem entirely from your own understanding. You see the whole picture, the cause and the effect.
But your mind becomes passive when it is subjected to inadequate ideas.
Right. Confused, fragmented perceptions. They are the result of external influences acting upon you before you can fully comprehend them.
So when I'm in a passive state, I am essentially just reacting to whatever the world throws at me, rather than acting from my own center.
Precisely. And before we explore how emotions form from those reactions, there is a strict logical boundary established regarding our basic survival.
The idea that things of a contrary nature cannot exist within the same subject.
Yes. You cannot have something inherently inside you that seeks your own destruction. Any force that seeks to destroy you must, by definition, come from the outside.
Because a system can't be programmed to dismantle itself if its baseline function is to exist.
Exactly. And this extends perfectly to the mind. An idea that denies the existence of your body simply cannot exist in your mind.
Your mind's very foundation is the affirmation of your body's physical existence.
It cannot hold a thought that fundamentally opposes its own foundation. Every single thing in the universe, just by its very nature, strives to persist in its own existence indefinitely.
A stone doesn't contain a mechanism to turn itself into dust. A tree doesn't harbor a desire to wither. It just wants to endure.
And there's a specific term for this in the philosophy, and it's one you really have to sit with to grasp the weight of it.
Conatus?
Yes, conatus, the endeavor to persist. This striving isn't just an action of being performed. It is the actual defining essence of the thing itself. It is the absolute core of what you are.
I mean, if you imagine a heavy stone rolling down a long hill, if you could somehow grant that stone a spark of consciousness, its pure, unthinking drive to just keep rolling, to continue being a rolling stone against the friction of the ground, that drive is its conatus.
For us as complex human beings, this striving takes on very specific names depending on how it manifests in our biology and our psychology.
Right. When this endeavor to persist relates only to your mind, it is called will. You will yourself to focus, to think, to solve a puzzle.
But when it relates to both your mind and your body simultaneously, it becomes appetite or impulse. It is the baseline biological and mental hunger to keep living, to keep moving forward.
And this is where the perspective shifts in a way that is just profoundly counterintuitive, because the philosophy states that when we become conscious of this appetite, it transforms into desire.
It does.
But wait, let me make sure I am fully absorbing this, because we usually think we look out at the world, we evaluate something objectively, we decide it is a good thing, and therefore we desire it.
And that's the standard assumption, yeah.
Are we saying that process is actually backwards?
Completely backwards. We do not desire things because we judge them to be good. We judge things to be good because we desire them.
That completely upends how I think about my own daily choices. It means I'm not drawn to the good. My drawing toward it is what paints it as good in my mind.
Exactly.
Think about how that plays out in something as simple as craving a specific, heavily marketed brand of coffee. I might tell myself, and anyone who asks, that I want it because the beans are ethically sourced, or the roast profile is objectively superior. I label it as a good product.
But really, your mental and biological appetite, your conatus, was drawn to it first.
Maybe because of a subtle association with comfort, or the aesthetic of the branding, or just the raw need for energy. And only after my blind drive points me toward it does my conscious mind stamp it with the label of objective good to justify the craving.
That is a perfect modern translation of the concept. Your conatus points you toward whatever it senses will sustain you. And because your mind and your body are perfectly parallel in this system, they are two sides of the exact same coin. Whatever increases or decreases your body's power of activity simultaneously increases or decreases your mind's power of thinking.
They move together, always in lockstep.
Always.
So if my mind and body are locked in this constant silent struggle to simply keep existing against the friction of the world, what does it actually feel like when we succeed or fail at that striving?
It feels like joy and sorrow. But here there are not just fleeting feelings or transient moods. They are literal transitions in your state of being.
Joy is the actual transition to a greater state of perfection or vitality.
It is the tangible feeling of your power of acting increasing. Sorrow, conversely, is the transition to a lesser state of perfection. It is a real, measurable decrease in your power to exist and act in the world.
And because my mind's primary job is to affirm the existence of my body, it must naturally fight against anything that causes sorrow.
It fights it automatically. When you encounter something that decreases your power, Your mind struggles to imagine something else, anything else, that excludes the existence of that harmful thing. It is a biological defense mechanism translated into thought.
From those two primary transitions, moving up in vitality or moving down, the entire complex spectrum of human feeling is constructed. But how do we get from a simple transition of vitality to something as heavy as love or hate?
Think of a sunflower for a moment. It naturally, inevitably turns its face toward the warmth of the sun. That warmth increases its vitality, its conatus.
Right.
Now, if that sunflower had a mind, it would associate that increase in vitality, that feeling of joy directly with the sun.
Yeah.
That simple association of joy with an external object is the exact definition of love.
And on the other hand, the sunflower recoils from the freezing dark of night, which diminishes its vitality. The association of that sorrow with the dark is hate.
Yes.
So love is nothing more than joy accompanied by the idea of an external cause, and hate is simply sorrow accompanied by the idea of an external cause.
It is the formula.
Wait, if I love someone, is this philosophy suggesting that my love is just a biological increase in my own vitality, and my mind has merely linked that feeling to their face? Isn't that a bit cold? A bit mechanical?
It sounds mechanical at first, I know, but consider the depth of it. It means your love for someone isn't just a poetic concept. It is literally your mind and body recognizing that this person enhances your very ability to exist. They make you more alive. It grounds love in the ultimate intimacy of survival.
That does make sense. It's grounded. But human life is a lot messier than a sunflower reacting to the sun in the dark. We don't just love things that warm us and hate things that freeze us.
True. And this is where our emotions become entangled in accidental associations. Perfectly neutral things, things that have absolutely no inherent power to bring you joy or sorrow on their own, can become objects of deep love or quiet hate purely by the chance of their proximity.
By accident.
Completely. If you happen to experience a profound joy while a completely unrelated neutral object is present in your environment, your mind irrevocably links the two. You will begin to love that neutral object simply because it was in the room when you felt alive.
This explains so much about the complicated, messy situations we find ourselves in. Think about a corporate job that you logically know you dislike. It drains your vitality, but you also feel this strange, lingering attachment to it, perhaps because you accomplished something deeply meaningful there years ago, or you met a close friend there.
The environment itself was just the backdrop to a moment of joy, and now you love the backdrop.
Or consider a toxic friendship. The person might consistently diminish your vitality now, acting as a source of sorrow, but because they were present during a formative period of joy in your past, your mind permanently links them to that joy.
Which leads directly to what the book calls the fluctuations of the mind. You can feel both love and hate for the exact same person simultaneously, simply because they hold different conflicting associations for you. You are torn apart by your own mental wiring.
We get caught in this web through sympathy and antipathy, too. We might find ourselves feeling an inexplicable warmth toward a stranger simply because they have the same mannerisms as someone we already love.
The mind transfers the emotional weight from the original object to the new one without asking for our permission.
And time offers no escape from this wiring, does it?
No, it doesn't. We tend to think a memory is weaker than a present reality. But the logic here suggests that the mind reacts to images of the past, the present, and the future with the exact same emotional intensity.
The image itself, as it exists in your mind, carries the same force regardless of where it sits on the physical timeline.
The mind doesn't know the difference between then and now when it comes to the raw feeling. It just feels the image.
And this illusion of time is what creates our most complex, agonizing emotions. Take hope, for example. We usually elevate hope as a virtue. But in this framework, hope is simply defined as an inconstant, flickering joy. It is born from an image of a future outcome, but it is an outcome you are doubtful about.
While fear is the exact reverse, an inconstant sorrow arising from that same doubtful future, they are twins, born entirely of uncertainty.
They only exist in the shadow of doubt.
Exactly. The moment the doubt is removed from the equation, the emotion crystallizes into something hard and permanent. Hope solidifies into confidence or relief, and fear plunges into absolute despair.
The core emotion, the joy or the sorrow, remains the same, but the uncertainty that kept it suspended is gone, leaving you with the raw, unavoidable reality of the transition.
As you navigate these transitions, you don't do it in isolation. You are constantly entangled with the beings around you. Your emotions naturally mirror the fates of the things you love.
If you imagine a loved object being destroyed, your own vitality drops. You feel intense sorrow. If you imagine it flourishing, you feel joy. Your well-being becomes completely hostage to theirs.
We naturally extend this mirroring to other people in our orbit. If someone brings joy to the thing you love, you automatically love that person. You can't help it.
If they bring sorrow to what you love, you hate them. You become an emotional mirror, reflecting the impacts on the things you hold dear.
This mirroring goes even deeper through a mechanism called the imitation of effects. We are fundamentally wired to feel what beings similar to us, our fellow human beings, feel.
When you see someone who is like you suffering, you cannot help but feel pity. Their sorrow infects you, lowering your own perfection.
And if you see them deeply desiring something, you will suddenly desire it too. This is the root of emulation, the competitive urge to want what others want simply because they want it.
It's an invisible contagion. And if you think about it, this imitation of effects is the exact mathematical formula that modern social media algorithms exploit every single second.
They absolutely do.
They farm our joy and sorrow by endlessly showing us people just like us who are either suffering, which triggers our pity and keeps us engaged through outrage or sadness, or showing us people desiring something, which triggers our emulation. We suddenly want the vacation they're on or the lifestyle they have, simply because the algorithm showed us a being similar to us desiring it.
Our conatus is being manipulated by a digital mirror. It is a chilling but entirely accurate application of the concept.
And amidst all this mirroring and copying of desires, your ego is desperately trying to protect itself. Because of our conatus, we naturally try to affirm everything that brings joy to ourselves, and we actively suppress anything that brings sorrow.
This instinct inevitably warps our perception of reality. It leads to overestimation or pride regarding ourselves and the people we love. We exaggerate their virtues, affirming only what brings us joy.
Conversely, it leads to underestimation or scorn for those we hate.
We strip our enemies of their human complexities because acknowledging their virtues would cause us sorrow. This explains why we hold on to our biases so tightly. It's not just intellectual stubbornness.
To admit we were wrong about an enemy might mean acknowledging they have virtues, which brings us sorrow. Our conatus violently rejects that sorrow, so we maintain the delusion.
It is like walking through a house of funhouse mirrors. The glass is specifically shaped to only reflect what flatters your conatus, making you and your loved ones look grand and flawless, while severely distorting your enemies into grotesque, one-dimensional caricatures.
You aren't seeing reality. You are seeing your own emotional survival mechanisms projected outward onto the world.
And because you are surrounded by others who are also operating through their own funhouse mirrors, the imitation of emotions forces you to adapt to the crowd. You start acting in ways specifically designed to please them.
When you do things purely to gain the praise and approval of others, this is categorized here as ambition.
It's the ultimate surrender to the external world. When this ambition succeeds and the crowd praises you, you feel an immense, inflating joy called self-complacency. You literally feel your power expand through their eyes.
But when you fail and the crowd blames you, you are crushed by shame or repentance. You have outsourced the regulation of your joy and sorrow to the fluctuating, irrational opinions of people who are just as confused and blindly striving as you are.
This shared emotional landscape has a particularly dark side. Because we imitate the desires of others, we want everyone to love what we love. We want our joys validated by the collective.
But this creates a devastating paradox when it comes to things that cannot be shared. If someone else exclusively possesses the very thing you love and desire, you feel a deep, corrosive envy.
Which leads us into the quietly devastating mechanics of jealousy. Let's trace the geometry of that possessive triangle. You love a person, that person gives themselves to another. What exactly happens in the machinery of the mind?
Your love becomes profoundly contaminated by hate. You hate the loved object because it broke its exclusive bond with you, severing your primary source of joy.
And simultaneously, you hate the rival out of pure envy. They have monopolized your joy. This toxic, churning mixture of love, hate, and envy is the specific, precise definition of jealousy. It is a war within the mind.
The visceral pain of jealousy is uniquely brutal because of how the mind associates images, as we discussed earlier. The image of the person you love becomes permanently, unavoidably linked in your mind with the image of your rival.
Every single time you try to picture the love, the sorrow of the rival's presence poisons the thought. The mind is trapped in a loop, torturing itself with an association it cannot sever.
This loop often triggers a deep sense of longing or nostalgia. When you remember a past joy, your conatus desperately wants to recreate it.
But it doesn't just want a similar joy. It wants it exactly as it was, under the exact same conditions. If you try to recreate a perfect evening from your past and even one single element is missing, perhaps the weather is different or a specific song isn't playing, you are struck by profound sorrow.
The absence of that single condition negates the joy entirely.
And this unfulfilled longing can easily twist into something far more dangerous, the corruption of love. There is a tragic mathematical reality at play here.
If you truly deeply love someone and through these mechanisms of jealousy or broken conditions that love ends up turning to hate, that hate will be far more intense than if you had never loved them at all.
The math is unforgiving. The stronger the initial joy was, the more violent the resulting hate will be. The sorrow of losing a massive joy fuels a proportionally massive hatred. The memory of the love actually feeds the hate, making it monstrous.
Which leads directly into the self-perpetuating cycle of harm. Hatred is not a passive state, it demands action.
The person who feels hate is naturally driven by their conatus to strive to harm or destroy the object of their hate. It is a biological effort to remove the source of sorrow.
If you hate someone and you see them suffering, you actually feel a perverse joy. Their sorrow brings you joy because the destruction of what you hate increases your own perceived security.
But it is a fractured, unstable joy. Because underneath the hatred, the imitation of effects is still running in your mind. You are still biologically wired to feel pity for a fellow human.
So you are torn between the joy of your enemy's destruction and the subconscious pity for their pain. It's a terrible internal conflict. And the only thing that might stop the outward aggression is the fear of suffering and even greater harm in return.
And so hatred breeds more hatred, endlessly. If you merely believe that someone hates you, even if they have given you no justifiable cause, your mind will automatically begin to hate them back. You are reacting to the perceived threat to your existence.
It escalates, bouncing back and forth, amplifying with every reflection between two people.
We walk through our entire lives carrying this heavy, unquestioned assumption that we are the sovereign authors of our choices. We believe we are in total control of who we love, who we hate, and what we strive for.
Yet, as you sit with the architecture outlined in this book, a vastly different reality emerges. We are constantly, endlessly pushed and pulled by an invisible web of chance associations, the lingering ghosts of past joys, the unconscious imitations of the crowd around us.
And the relentless, blind drive of our own conatus simply trying to keep us intact against the friction of the world.
It forces a very quiet reckoning. If our deepest emotions, our loves, our violent hates, our fragile hopes, and our quietest jealousies are essentially mathematical equations, inevitable reactions of our bare desire to exist colliding with the inputs of the outside world.
Then what does it actually mean to be free?
If the geometry of our feelings is already laid out and we are just moving blindly through the proofs, when you really sit down in the quiet of your own mind and look at the human soul through the lens of this text, it ceases to be this unpredictable, mystical cloud we so often pretend it is.
Right. There is no magic to it here.
No magic at all. We're observing something far more profound and perhaps a little unsettling. It's a strict, elegant system of physics, a geometry of the mind.
It really is. The book has effectively handed us a mathematical blueprint of human nature. It maps out exactly mechanically why we feel what we feel.
And our mission right now is just to sit quietly and observe this, to look at this complex web of love, hate, and the self. Because understanding the exact definitions of our emotions, these mechanical definitions, gives you the power to actually navigate them, rather than, just being swept away by the current.
It is a stunning, grounding perspective. We're so incredibly used to treating our feelings as these poetic, untamed mysteries. But in the book, every single emotion follows exact laws, like gravity or momentum.
Yeah, like the sheer dynamics of love and reciprocation it outlines. It operates on almost a perfect, inescapable mirroring effect.
Exactly. If you believe someone loves you and you haven't done anything specific to cause it, you automatically love them back. It isn't a choice. It is a reflex.
But the inverse carries a remarkably heavy sorrow. If you do a favor for someone out of pure love, and that effort goes entirely unrecognized or unreciprocated, your mind experiences a profound, measurable drop in joy.
It is a painful kind of math. You put energy into the system, and when it doesn't return, there is a literal deficit in your soul.
But where this gets truly dark for me is the caveat the book provides. What happens if someone loves you, but your pre-existing hatred for them is stronger than that incoming affection? You would naturally assume the love would soften you, right?
You would assume that, yes.
Yeah.
But the geometry of the mind doesn't work on sentimentality. If the hatred is the dominant force, it consumes the incoming affection and warps it.
It warps it into cruelty.
Yes. The text argues that we might actually react with cruelty. It is a terrifying kind of vain glory. You recognize their love, you see that you have power over them, but because hatred dominates your internal state, your mind weaponizes that affection.
You take pride in denying them.
Right. You choose cruelty over gratitude because the system prioritizes the expression of your dominant feeling.
I have to pause on that because the idea of weaponizing someone's love just to feed your own hate it's chilling.
It is deeply unsettling.
But the book doesn't leave us stranded in that darkness. There is this completely beautiful inverse physics when it comes to the conquering of hate. The baseline rule is that hate, when met with returning hate, multiplies. It just feeds on itself endlessly, bouncing back and
A
forth.
perpetual motion machine of sorrow.
Exactly. But if a deep, entrenched hatred is met with love, and that love is strong enough to completely overpower and extinguish the hate, something remarkable happens. The resulting love is actually greater, quantifiably, mathematically larger than if there had never been hate in the first place.
It's a compounding effect. The joy of the new love is added directly to the immense relief of the sorrow being removed, the hate being removed. It is a dual expansion of the mind's power.
It makes me think of the way of bone fractures. The way the human body heals is that the bone calcifies at the exact site of the break. It becomes denser, infinitely stronger at that specific fracture line than it was before the injury.
That is a brilliant way to look at it.
Or even kintsugi, that Japanese art of repairing broken pottery by filling the cracks with pure gold. The history of the hatred, the memory of the break, combined with the immense emotional labor required to overcome it, it adds a completely new layer of value. The love isn't just restored, it is fundamentally upgraded because it survived the fracture.
That is a perfect visualization. The mind keeps the ledger, and the mind is incredibly sensitive to these associative links, which also explains the phenomenon of transferred emotion.
Right, the automatic transfer.
The book argues that if we see someone inflicting harm, or even just directing hatred toward a person we already love, our mind instantly and automatically transfers that hatred to the aggressor. We don't need to be harmed ourselves.
The geometry of our love demands that whatever threatens the object of our joy automatically becomes the object of our hate.
And that silent, automatic association is exactly where prejudice is born.
It is. It's not just a social failing. The book frames it as a mechanical error in how we process the world.
A glitch in the physics.
Yeah. If someone from a completely different class, a different race, or a different nation brings you joy or sorrow, your mind doesn't just politely attach that feeling to the individual. In its irrational, desperate attempt to categorize the world, your mind applies that love or hate to the entire group that person belongs to.
A single source of pain creates a blanket aversion. It sweeps up everyone under a universal name.
It is the mind trying to protect itself by mapping a single data point onto a whole population. But it creates this systemic, lasting distortion. And speaking of the mind's strange, distorted attachments to pain, there is this fascinating paradox the book explores regarding the sorrow of destruction.
Ah, yes. The lingering sorrow.
We generally assume that if something we deeply, truly hate is destroyed, we will feel nothing but pure, unadulterated joy. But the reality of our mental physics is that the joy is almost always laced with a quiet sorrow.
Because the mind doesn't just let go.
It's almost like a phantom limb. When you lose an arm or a leg, the physical source of the pain might be completely gone, but your mind still holds the exact shape of that suffering. The nerve endings in your brain are still firing into empty space, causing an ache for something that isn't there.
It's a structural void.
Right. When a hated object is destroyed, its image is still tied to your mind. You spent so much mental energy holding on to that hatred, tracking it, defining your very identity against it, that its sudden absence leaves a psychological void. The shape of the hate is still there, even if the object isn't.
The architecture of the hatred remains. And the intensity of all these structures, the love, the hate, the joy, the void, is heavily modified by our perception of free will. The book lays out this brilliant distinction. We feel significantly stronger emotions toward beings we believe are free, like other humans, compared to inanimate objects.
The attribution of choice acts as a massive multiplier to our emotional response.
Exactly. Think about the difference in your daily life. Imagine you are walking in the woods, looking up at the canopy, and you accidentally trip over an exposed tree root. You scrape your knee. The physical pain is sharp, but your emotional reaction, it is a brief, mild annoyance.
Maybe a bit of frustration at yourself for not looking.
Right. Now imagine walking down the sidewalk and having a stranger intentionally stick their foot out to trip you. The physical scrape on your knee is exactly the same, But the emotion, you feel this intense, boiling, all-consuming anger.
It is infinitely heavier because you are factoring in their freedom. You are reacting not just to the pain, but to their active choice to inflict it. The burden of their free will makes your hatred so much denser.
Because when we assign free will, we assign total responsibility as the cause. And our minds are absolutely desperate to find meaning and causes everywhere, which is exactly how omens and superstitions are born.
That part of the book is so revealing. How any random, completely unconnected object can accidentally become a source of hope or fear.
If you happen to be looking out the window at a specific solitary bird sitting on a wire, the exact moment you receive a devastating phone call, your mind unconsciously binds the sorrow of the news to the image of the bird.
That random object becomes an omen.
It is just the mind's machinery misfiring, trying to draw lines between completely unrelated points, birthing human superstition out of pure coincidence.
We are constantly trying to read a script that isn't there. And that leads right into the intense subjectivity of judgment. The book makes it clear that the exact same object or the exact same event can affect two different people in completely opposite ways.
Or even the same person differently over time.
Yes. This is why human labels are so incredibly fragile. What you might call brave simply because you underestimate the danger of a situation, another person calls timid because they see a massive threat you entirely missed. The label doesn't belong to the action, it belongs entirely to the internal state of the observer.
That subjectivity is deeply tied to how we process new information, particularly through the lens of wonder. In this geometric system, wonder isn't quite an emotion itself. It is the mind freezing.
A static state.
Yes. It is the imagination stopping dead in its tracks because it has encountered a completely unique image that has no connection to anything else in its memory. There are no associative links to pull from, so the mind just hovers in this static state of wonder. And from this static state branch out several highly complex emotions.
Depending on what gets mixed in.
Exactly. If wonder is combined with fear, it paralyzes us, and we call it panic.
And if that wonder is directed at someone's immense virtue or wisdom, it thaws into veneration. If that wonder is heavily laced with love, it turns into devotion. It is fascinating how that initial freeze can melt into such widely different directions based on the secondary feeling.
And we must also look at the direct opposite of wonder, which is contempt. Contempt is when the mind looks at an object, but instead of freezing in awe, it is utterly unmoved. The mind focuses entirely on what the object lacks rather than what it has. It is a profound emptiness of attention.
A dismissal of the object's presence entirely. But shifting from how we look at the external world to how we look at ourselves, the book delves into the joy and sorrow of the self. The mind naturally, almost inevitably, rejoices when it contemplates its own power of acting.
Self-satisfaction.
Right. When you sit and recognize your own capability, your own strength, you feel self-satisfaction. But when the mind is forced to observe its own impotence, its own unavoidable limitations, it sinks into humility.
Because every individual person's power of acting in fundamental essence is unique. The book clarifies that there are an infinite number of emotional variations. There are as many types of emotions as there are objects in the world.
The desires of different beings are entirely unique to their specific nature. You cannot homogenize feeling.
The desire of one entity is structurally alien to the desire of another.
You can't compare the joy of a horse finding a wide-open pasture to the joy of a human being solving a complex moral dilemma. They both experience joy, but the horse's joy is purely survival-driven, physical, and immediate to its nature. The human's joy is existential and layered.
Even just looking at humans, the fleeting consumptive joy of a glutton devouring a heavy meal is structurally, mechanically different from the deep, enduring, contemplative joy of a philosopher uncovering a universal truth.
The objects of their desires completely dictate the very nature, the very texture of their feelings.
This brings us to a monumental turning point in the text, the fundamental distinction between passive and active emotions. Everything we've discussed so far, the reflexive hatreds, the accidental omens, the subjective wonders, these are passive emotions.
They happen to us.
They are like the weather. We are just standing in the rain experiencing the sorrow or joy inflicted by external causes, shivering or basking without any real control. But they're also active emotions. These are the feelings we generate ourselves from within through our own clear reason.
And what's profoundly beautiful about this system is that active emotions are only ever tied to joy and desire. There is no such thing as an active sorrow.
Never.
When you are truly using reason, when you are understanding the world, you are expressing your power, and that expression is inherently joyful. The book highlights two main virtues that stem directly from this act of reason. First is courage, which is the rational, measured desire to preserve oneself.
It is not panic. It is not reckless, chest-beating bravery.
No, it is a clear-eyed, grounded strength. The second is nobility or generosity. This is the rational desire to help other people and form friendships. It is an active, deliberate joy in the well-being of others, completely untouched by passive envy or fear.
To truly grasp how these active and passive states govern our lives, we have to walk slowly through the book's master definitions of human feeling. It establishes a core trinity of the human condition. Three foundational pillars from which every single other feeling in existence is built.
The starting point of the geometry.
Yes. The first of these is desire. Desire is not just casually wanting something. It is the very essence of a human being. It is our fundamental, continuous drive to exist, to act, to persevere in our own being.
It is the engine. And the second and third pillars are joy and sorrow, and the way the book defines them is just breathtaking in its simplicity. Joy is not just a smile or a laugh. It is the transition of the soul to a greater state of perfection. It is an active increase in our power to act and think.
An expansion.
Yes. Sorrow is the exact opposite, the transition to a lesser state of perfection, restriction, or diminishing of our power. I always picture the soul as a light connected to a dimmer switch. Joy is that quiet, electric thrill of the light brightening, the illumination expanding its reach across the walls of the room.
And sorrow is the dimming of that light, the shadows creeping in from the corners, a literal, palpable shrinking of your power to exist in this space.
With that dimmer switch in mind, the deeply familiar, messy emotions we deal with every day suddenly become clear mathematical equations. What is love? Love is simply joy. The brightening of the light, accompanied by the idea of an external cause. We feel our power increase, and we point at someone in the room and say, "You did this."
And hate is just sorrow, the dimming of the light, accompanied by an external cause. We feel our power shrink, the room gets darker, and we blame the object standing in front of us.
If the joy or sorrow is accidental, caused by something barely related to the object, we categorize it simply as inclination or aversion.
And then the book maps out the timeline of uncertainty. Because our minds don't just live in the present, we constantly project our light into the future, and because of that, we experience hope and fear.
Hope is just an inconstant joy. It is a joy that flickers and wavers because we are thinking about a future event whose outcome is completely uncertain. Fear is an inconstant sorrow regarding that exact same uncertain future.
But we have to ask, what happens when the timeline moves forward and that uncertainty is finally removed? That inconstant flickering joy of hope hardens into confidence. The wavering, inconstant sorrow of fear crystallizes permanently into despair.
If you want to feel the weight of this, think about the agonizing, suspended animation of waiting for a vital medical test result. For days, you are trapped in a purgatory of hope and fear. You imagine a clean bill of health and the light brightens faintly, that is hope. You imagine the worst-case scenario and the light dims, that is fear, back and forth.
The flickering.
But the moment you finally hold that paper envelope in your hands and slice it open, the uncertainty vanishes. The heavy, grounding drop of reality hits you. If the news is good, the flickering hope floods instantly into absolute confidence. If the news is bad, the fear solidifies into the cold, hard, unmoving floor of despair. The equation solves itself.
And if we take that same timeline and look backward, the mind processes the past with the same geometric precision. Gladness is the joy we feel when a past event turns out better than we had expected. Remorse is the sorrow we feel when a past event turns out worse than we had hoped.
It is all the exact same core energy, just shifted through the variables of time and certainty.
And we move from these internal timelines outward into the social emotions. The ego gets heavily involved, and the definitions become even more intricate. Empathy is broken down mechanically. Pity is just sorrow felt for another person's suffering. Our internal light dims simply because we are observing theirs dim.
Favor is a secondary love. It is love for someone not because of what they did to us, but because they helped someone else.
And indignation is hatred for someone because they harmed another. We are constantly, silently adjusting our own internal dimmer switch based on the intersecting lights and shadows of the people around us.
And because our ego is so deeply involved in these social interactions, we constantly distort the true value of things. We experience overestimation, which is blindly valuing someone entirely too highly simply because we love them. We willfully ignore their flaws to keep our joy intact.
And conversely, we experience underestimation, which is devaluing someone out of hate, blinding ourselves to their genuine virtues just to justify and maintain our sorrow.
This distortion leads perfectly into the stark contrast between envy and compassion. Envy is a twisted, double-edged sorrow. It is sorrow at another person's joy and a sickening joy at their pain. It is the ego feeling directly threatened by the light of others, wanting to extinguish it.
Compassion is its exact mirror opposite, feeling genuine joy at another's joy and sorrow at their pain. Your light harmonizes with theirs instead of competing with it.
But the quietest, most revealing part of the entire book, I think, is when it analyzes the ego's hall of mirrors, how we perceive ourselves.
Yeah.
We have self-complacency, which is a natural joy arising from looking at our own power and achievements. But then there is repentance.
Repentance is defined as sorrow over an action we believe we chose freely. But the text subtly, almost dangerously, points out that society and education artificially programmed this repentance into us through systems of praise and punishment.
We are trained from childhood to feel this specific sorrow to keep us manageable and compliant.
Think about the absolute chilling weight of that realization.
How much of the internal guilt you carry right now, the repentance that keeps you up at night, is actually your own moral compass, and how much of it is just constructed by external forces to keep you in line? It strips away the illusion of our own autonomy.
And depending on how we view ourselves through these distorted mirrors, we fall into pride or abjection. Pride is pure arrogance. It is overestimating oneself out of a blinding self-love.
Abjection is the painful, crushing underestimation of oneself due to sorrow. We shrink our own light voluntarily.
And hovering constantly above all our actions is the anticipation of society's gaze. Honor is the joy we feel from anticipated praise, and shame is the deep sorrow from anticipated blame.
Which brings us to the final definition in this intricate mapping, and perhaps the most haunting one of all: longing. Longing is defined as the intense desire to possess something, but that desire is actively, relentlessly blocked by the painful memory that the object is missing or entirely unattainable.
It is a desire locked in a permanent wrestling match with absence.
It is the exact feeling of waking up in the pitch black of night, reaching out your hand to hold someone you love, someone who used to be there beside you, only to feel your fingers close around empty air. The fundamental desire to hold them propels your hand forward, but the memory of their absence is the cold, unyielding air your fingers meet.
That friction between wanting with all your soul and missing with all your mind, that is longing. It is a mathematical equation of grief.
When you lay all of these definitions out, side by side, from the most fleeting omens to the deepest longing, it leaves you with a very quiet, lingering reflection on the sheer mechanical precision of our feelings. We walk through our days assuming our reactions are organic, spontaneous expressions of our unique souls. But the physics outlined here ask a deeply terrifying question.
How much of your daily free will is actually governed by the silent, relentless geometry of these intersecting joys, sorrows, and external causes?
Are you actually choosing your hatreds and your loves, or are you just helplessly watching the math solve itself inside your own mind? It makes every sudden burst of anger you feel at a stranger, every quiet wave of pity, every moment of crushing longing look entirely different. You stop seeing yourself as the sovereign author of your emotions, and you start seeing yourself as the canvas where these absolute laws of physics are playing out. And as we carry this exact train of thought straight forward into the next phase of our journey through the text, we have to look even closer at the machinery. And tracing those geometric lines, mapping out the architecture of our very thoughts, you really begin to see how Spinoza's ethics functions as this profound, intricate schematic.
It really does.
Yeah, it is not just a book of abstract philosophy. It is a painstakingly detailed mechanical drawing of human nature, of our rawest emotions, and of the unforgiving laws that govern the entire universe. Sitting here with you in the quiet of this late hour to sort of piecing together this map of the mind, it feels incredibly intimate. It is like we are looking at the blueprints of our own hidden machinery.
It does feel like uncovering a hidden schematic, especially as we venture into this specific territory of the text. The dense, often overwhelming web of human desires. The book brings us face to face with the inescapable reality of what gives human bondage.
It just sounds incredibly bleak, right?
Oh, absolutely. It sounds bleak, this idea that we are tethered to our passions, subjected to forces that just pull our strings. Yet the text presents a beautiful paradox here. Confronting these mechanisms, actually charting the exact weight and tension of the chains of our desires, is the absolute prerequisite for genuine freedom. I mean, we cannot navigate out of a maze until we map its walls.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the book does not just, wave its hands at the concept of desire in some vague, poetic way. It drops us into a highly specific, rigorous taxonomy of the emotions that fall under that massive umbrella.
It's extremely clinical.
Right, it categorizes our feelings with the precision of a botanist classifying venomous plants. Let's start with how we reflect the desires of others. The text introduces this concept of emulation or mimicry.
Emulation is defined here as the desire for something that is generated solely because we imagine that others desire it too. We are highly permeable creatures. The boundary between your mind and the minds around you is startlingly porous.
I think we have all felt that subtle, almost gravitational pull in our daily lives. Imagine you are sitting with a friend, and a baseball suddenly flies toward the fence near their head. You watch your friend violently flinch, and without a single conscious thought, your own shoulders tense up. You flinch with them.
Your body physically mimics their fear.
Exactly. And the text suggests this operates on a much deeper level with desire, doesn't it? If someone else is anxious, you absorb that anxiety. If society collectively hungers for a specific status or an object, that hunger infects you. This mirror-like mimicry forms the absolute bedrock of emulation.
The physical reflex you just described perfectly illustrates the psychological reflex the book is outlining. And this mirroring effect branches out into incredibly complex social desires. The text breaks down thankfulness or gratitude as a specific desire to return joy to someone who has benefited us. And it defines benevolence as the desire to bring joy to someone we actively pity.
But the breakdown of courtesy or deference is where the text gets almost painfully cynical. Or perhaps just painfully honest. We like to think of courtesy as inherent goodness, a noble character trait.
A virtue.
Right. But the book strips that away. It classifies deference purely as the desire to do what pleases others and to actively omit what displeases them. It is not about altruism. It is a calculated, often unconscious maneuver of social survival.
That stripping away of romanticized notions is a hallmark of this text. It refuses to let us hide behind flattering narratives about our own behavior. And if it dismantles our brighter social behaviors, it is equally clinical with our darker impulses.
Which brings us to anger and vengeance. Anger being the desire to inflict harm on someone we hate, and vengeance being the reactive desire to return pain to someone who has injured us. But the categorization of cruelty really stands out because of what the text places directly opposite to it.
Yes. Cruelty is analyzed as the warped desire to inflict harm, even upon someone we love or pity. The inverse of this, according to the book, is clemency or mildness. Now, the natural assumption is that mildness is simply the absence of anger. We picture a placid, passive temperament, a quiet lake.
Just someone who doesn't get mad easily.
Exactly. But the text vehemently rejects that. Mildness is categorized as an active, potent power of the mind. It is the fierce, internal exertion of will required to actively restrain one's own anger and vengeance. It is a muscular tension, not a relaxed state.
So to be truly mild, you are essentially wrestling a wild animal inside your own chest and winning. You're not empty of fire, you are containing it. That reframing really changes how you look at the quietest people in the room. Let's shift to the emotions centered around risk and survival. The text categorizes timidity as the desire to avoid a greater evil by choosing a lesser one.
And daring is the impulse to pursue a goal despite severe danger.
Right. Then there is cowardice, which is when the desire to avoid a risk entirely overrides any other impulse. But the most striking analysis in this section is the dissection of consternation, which we would just call panic. The text does not describe panic as a simple, overwhelming fear. It defines it as a profound internal collision. It is a double fear.
A double fear is the perfect way to phrase it.
Walk me through the mechanics of that collision.
Imagine you are in immense danger. Your primary desire is to flee, to avoid the harm. But the sheer magnitude of the danger induces a state of amazement. The mind is so entirely captivated, so staggered by the terrifying object, that the desire to run is blocked by the inability to process anything else. The desire to survive is paralyzed by the overwhelming astonishment at the threat. It is a catastrophic system failure of the mind's defensive impulses.
That is the nightmare scenario where you are standing in the middle of the road watching a car speed toward you, and instead of diving out of the way, your brain just goes blank and your feet turn a lead. Your survival instinct is essentially suffocated by the sheer awe of the impending disaster.
It is a chillingly accurate diagnosis of human paralysis.
It really is. Now, after dissecting these acute reactions, the text pivots to the chronic, heavy appetites, the excesses. It lists ambition, gluttony, drunkenness, avarice, and lust.
And ambition is positioned as the great engine among them. It is the desire for honor that secretly fuels almost all other emotional pursuits. The text leans on a rather sharp observation from Cicero here, noting that even the philosophers who write treatises denouncing fame and praising humility make sure to meticulously put their own names on the covers of their books.
The ultimate irony.
Exactly. Ambition is the inescapable ghost in the machine.
I have to admit, seeing that Cicero quote deployed as geometric evidence of human vanity made me smile. We're all caught in that snare. But what sets these excesses apart from the other emotions we just discussed, like gluttony, lust, greed?
The defining characteristic of these excesses is that they do not possess a true opposite emotion. You can contrast love with hate or daring with timidity. But these excesses are not derived from the free, fluid activities of the mind. They are inextricably bound to physiological acts: eating, drinking, hoarding, copulating.
So they are tied to the body itself.
Yes. Because they are tied directly to the physical act and the biological drive, there is no counter-emotion that cancels them out. They stand alone as gravitational forces pulling the body.
Having laid out this sprawling, detailed map of our specific desires, the text pulls back the camera to give us a unified, general definition of what a passive emotion actually is. It states, very plainly, that an emotion is a confused idea.
What's fascinating here is the physical weight the text assigns to that confused idea. We tend to think of an emotion as an ephemeral cloud passing through the theater of the mind, but the text argues for the force of existence. When the mind experiences this confused idea we call an emotion, it fundamentally affirms a greater or lesser power of existence for the body than it possessed a moment before.
So an emotion is a literal fluctuation in your life force.
An expansion or contraction of your physical power to exist in the world.
Let me make sure we are translating this geometry correctly. The text adds a critical nuance. It warns us not to misinterpret this as the mind sitting back and comparing a memory of yesterday's body with the reality of today's body. It is not an accounting trick.
Precisely. The mind is not acting as an observer measuring past against present. The confused idea, the emotion itself, contains a specific magnitude of reality in the present moment. If you feel profound, passive joy, that idea right now physically comprises a greater reality and capability for your body.
And conversely, if you feel deep sorrow, that idea inherently possesses less reality, effectively shrinking your biological and mental footprint in the universe.
That is exactly the mechanic.
This feels like a massive departure from how other thinkers of the era approached the mind and body. You read the footnotes in this text, and it is quietly dismantling Descartes. Descartes essentially sequestered the emotions, treating them as products of the imagination interacting with the pineal gland in the brain. He treated the mind as the pilot and the body as the ship.
Descartes relied on a strict dualism, a clean separation. This text shatters that division. By defining emotion as a fluctuation in the force of existence, the book inextricably links our passing feelings to the absolute necessity of nature, to God, and to the fundamental cosmic drive of all things to simply continue existing.
Your passing feeling of melancholy is not just a misfiring gland.
No, it is a temporary decrease in your cosmic momentum. Mind and body are not pilot and ship. They are two expressions of the exact same substance.
Which brings us to the threshold of the most daunting thematic shift in the book, the era of human bondage. If our emotions are these deeply rooted physical expressions of our drive to exist, why are we so terrible at managing them? Why do you or I or anyone clearly know what is good for our health, our relationships, our futures, and yet feel completely compelled to do the exact opposite?
To answer why we are so fundamentally captive, the text first requires us to surrender one of our most comforting illusions: the idea that nature operates with an ultimate purpose or end goal. The universe is not conspiring to teach us lessons or achieve a grand design.
This is where the text uses the brilliant analogy of building a house. Let's say you are walking down the street and you see a construction site. There is a wooden frame, some exposed pipes, a half-finished roof. You look at it and say, well, that house is imperfect.
It was not finished.
Right, because you have a universal idea in your head of what a finished house looks like. You have a blueprint in your mind, and the physical reality does not match your mental blueprint. The text argues that we arrogantly take this localized human way of judging a construction site and paste it over the entire universe.
We project our human blueprints onto nature. If a storm wipes out a forest or a genetic mutation occurs, we say nature made an error or created something imperfect. We assume nature was aiming for a harmonious, finished product and missed the mark. This is what the text identifies as the fallacy of the final cause.
But surely the house was built for a purpose. It was built to provide shelter. How does the text reconcile human intent with a purposeless nature?
The text elegantly dismantles this. It argues that what we call the purpose of the house providing shelter is actually just a human impulse. The desire for shelter is a physical lack, an appetite within the human being that initiates the building process. It is the efficient cause, the engine pushing from behind.
It is not a mystical final cause pulling from the future.
Exactly. We confuse our internal pushing appetites for external pulling destinies. Nature, which the text equates with God, does not lack anything. Therefore, it has no appetite, no desires to fulfill, and no goals to reach. It simply acts out of the pure, boundless necessity of its own existence.
If the universe has no goals and no blueprint of perfection it is trying to achieve, then all our moral vocabulary suddenly loses its cosmic anchor. The text is brutal about this. It states that perfection and imperfection, just like good and evil, are not objective qualities hidden inside objects or events. They are merely modes of thinking.
They are the friction created when we rub two things together in our minds and compare them.
They are entirely relative to our own utility.
The text defines good as simply that which we know for certain is useful to us. Evil is strictly that which prevents us from attaining a good. There is no absolute, glowing orb of goodness floating in the ether.
The analogy the book provides here is so striking. Think of a piece of music. To someone drowning in melancholy, that upbeat, lively music might be perceived as profoundly good, a lifeline. To someone deep in mourning, grieving a profound loss, that exact same arrangement of notes feels offensive, intrusive, and bad.
And to someone who is entirely deaf, the music is neither good nor bad. It is nothing.
The nature of the music did not change. The arrangement of the notes is identical.
The music is utterly indifferent. The goodness or badness exists solely in the relationship between the sound waves and the biological emotional state of the listener. The text forces us to swallow the reality that human beings are not the center of the universe, and our moral judgments are not woven into the fabric of the stars.
We are just a tiny, fragile gear in a staggeringly massive mechanism, and this leads us to the terrifying physics of the mind explored in the next section. The text lays down an unshakable axiom. There's always something in nature stronger and more powerful than any given individual. We are constantly battered by external forces that vastly outmatch our internal strength.
And because we are constantly battered by these external forces, our perception of the world is stubbornly resistant to mere logic. We desperately want to believe that if we just educate ourselves, if we just learn the truth, our irrational fears and desires will evaporate. The mechanics of the mind, as proven here, do not allow for that fairy tale.
The text uses the example of looking at the sun. You step outside on a clear day, look up, and your visual imagination, your sensory apparatus tells you the sun is a flat, glowing disk about 200 feet away in the sky. It feels close.
Very close.
Later, you sit in a classroom, you study astronomy, and you learn the irrefutable truth. The sun is a massive sphere tens of millions of miles away. You possess the rational, true idea. But the next morning when you step outside and look up, what happens?
You still see a glowing disk 200 feet away.
Exactly. The rational truth does not delete the physical impression. Your sensory imagination is untouched by the astronomical data.
A true idea does not destroy a false idea simply by virtue of being true. Truth has no magical dissolving power over our physical, deeply ingrained perceptions. Rationality alone is a remarkably weak weapon against the brute force of a physical impression.
If rational truth cannot delete a false impression or a harmful emotion, what can? This brings us to the core, terrifying mechanic of our bondage. The text dictates that an emotion can only be restrained or entirely removed by an emotion that is both stronger than it and contrary to it.
You cannot fight a feeling with a fact. You can only fight a feeling with a heavier, more overwhelming feeling. If you are gripped by a destructive desire, calmly reading a list of reasons why it is bad for you will accomplish nothing. You must cultivate a contrary emotional force, a profound love for your future self, a visceral disgust for the outcome that physically overpowers the initial desire. It is a war of gravitational pulls, not a debate of logic.
And what makes this internal war so heavily skewed against us is the element of time. The text points out a devastating flaw in our emotional temporal processing. Our emotional response toward an object that is present right in front of us is exponentially stronger than our emotional response toward an object that is in the future or the past.
This is the exact architectural blueprint of why we make terrible choices. You are holding a cigarette, or staring at a destructive relationship, or contemplates a reckless financial decision. The object of your desire is present. Its emotional pull is immediate, vivid, and violently strong. Your rational knowledge tells you that in 10 years this will cause illness or heartbreak or ruin.
But that future consequence is an abstraction. It is distant.
The emotional weight of the future simply cannot generate enough force to counteract the blinding gravity of the present desire.
The present devours the future. It echoes that tragic lament the text quotes from the Roman poet Ovid. I see the better and approve it, but I follow the worse. Or King Solomon's weary observation, he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. You can possess all the geometric rational knowledge of the universe, clearly see the trap laid out before you, and still step right into it because the present emotion drags you by the collar.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it feels like a portrait of total despair. We are tiny, our reason is weak against present passions, and we are adrift in a purposeless universe. But the text does not abandon us in the dark. It pivots from this stark reality to a radical redefinition of what it means to live well. It asks, what does reason actually demand of us? Reason does not demand that we fight nature because we are nature. Reason demands that every person deeply love themselves and relentlessly seek their own true utility.
The text takes the concept of virtue, which usually carries this baggage of passive humility and self-denial, and completely reinvents it. Virtue, in this framework, is identical to power. Virtue is the raw, unadulterated effort to preserve one's own being according to the laws of one's own nature. To be virtuous is to be a powerhouse of self-preservation.
It removes the shame from the desire to survive and thrive. And it pushes this logic to a fascinating extreme regarding the impossibility of self-destruction. The text asserts mathematically that no entity can contain within its own nature the mechanism of its own destruction. No one, functioning freely under their own natural laws, desires to destroy themselves.
But the reality is that people do destroy themselves. People commit suicide. How does the text account for that within this rigid geometry of self-preservation?
The text addresses this by looking at external hidden forces. It uses the historical example of Seneca, the Roman philosopher who was ordered by the tyrant Nero to take his own life. Seneca did not desire death. He was forced into a corner where opening his veins was the lesser evil compared to the torture Nero would otherwise inflict.
So it is the timidity emotion we discussed earlier, choosing a smaller harm to avoid a catastrophic one.
Exactly. And the text goes further, addressing internal turmoil. It argues that when a person seemingly chooses to end their existence without a tyrant holding a sword to their neck, it is because hidden, external causes trauma, profound societal pressure, overwhelming physical or mental illness, have so deeply invaded and scrambled their imagination that their very nature has been altered.
They have been hijacked by external forces.
It is physically and logically impossible for human nature, operating freely and truly as itself, to seek its own negation.
There is a deep, quiet comfort in that idea. The core of who you are is irrevocably wired for life. And from this fiercely individualistic foundation of self-preservation, the text builds a surprisingly beautiful bridge to community. You would think a philosophy based entirely on maximizing your own power would lead to ruthless isolation. Instead, the text arrives at the conclusion that nothing in the universe is more useful to a human being than another human being who is also governed by reason.
To preserve ourselves optimally, to maximize our own power and virtue, we cannot survive in isolation. Our individual force is too weak against the vastness of nature. We must join our minds and bodies with others. When reasonable people unite, they form a collective mind and body that is exponentially more capable of securing the true utility of everyone involved. True self-interest, understood through reason, demands profound solidarity and the pursuit of a common good.
It all locks together. The relentless drive to preserve ourselves, the very engine of our existence, is the ultimate foundation of all human virtue and solidarity. We are built to seek our own power, and our greatest power is found in each other. But as we absorb this, a rather unsettling thought begins to surface, echoing back to the text's definition of emotion. If our deepest desires and daily actions are fundamentally driven by these inadequate ideas, these confused emotional states that pull us toward the present and blind us to the future, what exactly happens to our agency? If we are just reacting to the strongest emotional gravity in the room, are we ever truly acting, or are we only ever reacting?
That is the precipice this section leaves us standing on. Because recognizing how thoroughly these inadequate ideas dictate our movements is not the end of the inquiry. It is the vital, necessary diagnosis. Understanding the exact geometry of our bondage is the only way to figure out exactly how we dissect that next piece of the puzzle, which involves looking at
And so when we step back and look at the architecture of the human soul laid out before us in this book, we realize we are already deep inside the labyrinth.
We really are.
We've been carefully tracing this fragile web of human emotions. We've been mapping out what actually constitutes virtue in a universe that doesn't really care about our feelings, and seeing exactly how reason is meant to act as our quiet, unwavering guide through the dark.
Right.
But right here, the path splits entirely. We are going to examine the stark difference between living as a helpless slave to our own passions and achieving a state of real freedom through reason.
It's a massive divergence.
It is. We are going to explore the literal physics of why human beings inevitably conflict with one another, how we can ever hope to truly harmonize, and perhaps most fascinatingly, we are going to uncover some deeply counterintuitive truths about emotions we usually consider unconditionally good. Things like pity, humility, and hope.
It is a profound and, honestly, somewhat unsettling shift in perspective. To truly understand this transition from bondage to freedom, we have to look incredibly closely at the very foundation of virtue as it is defined here in the book.
Which is not how we usually define it.
Not at all. It requires us to systematically strip away all of our culturally inherited external moralizing. According to the rigid, beautiful logic we are following, true virtue is simply this: acting strictly according to the laws of our own specific nature in order to preserve our own existence.
Just that.
That is the entirety of it. We do not preserve ourselves for the sake of some other higher external goal. We don't act virtuously to please a distant judge or to earn a future reward. The very act of preserving our being, using our own internal power, is the absolute bedrock of virtue itself.
Hold on, let me pause you right there because I want to make sure you listening to this are hearing this the same way I am.
Yeah, it's tricky.
When I hear the phrase acting strictly to preserve our own existence, my modern brain immediately translates that to selfishness.
Hey. Of course.
It sounds like a ruthless survival of the fittest. Is that what we are really talking about here? Does virtue just mean looking out for number one?
It's a very natural reaction to have, but we have to completely reframe what the self actually means in this context. We are not talking about hoarding physical resources or stepping on others to survive.
Right.
Because our fundamental essence as humans is our mind, and the mind's core defining operation is reason, our highest conceivable effort, our ultimate biological and spiritual drive for self-preservation is the pure pursuit of understanding.
The pure pursuit of understanding.
Yes, it is the active state of knowing. The logical conclusion here, reached step by deliberate step, is that the absolute highest good and the supreme virtue of the human mind is the knowledge of the infinite.
And just to clarify, when we talk about the infinite or God in the specific context of this book, we aren't talking about a figure in the clouds, right? We are talking about the immutable laws of the universe itself.
Exactly. To know the infinite is simply to understand the flawless architecture of reality. Therefore, only things that genuinely aid this pursuit of clear, distinct understanding are truly good. And conversely, anything that clouds our mind, anything that hinders that pure understanding is fundamentally evil.
I keep thinking of it like a seed planted deep in the dark earth.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Just as a plant's inherent nature, its very drive to exist, is to quietly, relentlessly push upward, reaching through the soil for the sun, the human mind's innate nature is to constantly reach out for clear, distinct understanding.
Which, exactly.
The plant doesn't reach for the sun to be praised by the gardener. It reaches for the sun because that reaching is the definition of what it is. For us, understanding the infinite laws of the universe is our sunlight. It is a quiet, intense, undeniable drive.
That's a beautiful way to visualize it, and yet when we look around at our daily reality, that quiet reaching for the sun rarely feels peaceful.
Right. That is the great paradox. If our core nature is simply to seek understanding, why is there so much chaos? Why is human history, and honestly, just my average Tuesday, so full of conflict?
That brings us directly to the physics of human conflict, and it is driven entirely by the overwhelming power of passions.
The passions.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is a core, unyielding principle at play here in the book. Things that share absolutely nothing in common with our nature can neither help us nor harm us.
Okay.
An object or a force only becomes genuinely harmful when it is inherently contrary to our nature. And human beings, when they are ruled by passions rather than reason, become entirely contrary to one another.
Because the passions take over.
Passions are, by definition, external forces acting upon us. They render us passive. They completely strip away our agency.
Let's ground this, because the mechanics of this are really fascinating. Imagine two guys, let's call them Peter and Paul, like in the book, but let's modernize it a bit. Let's say Peter and Paul are coworkers, and Paul harbors a deep, consuming hatred for Peter. Why? Because Peter was just handed the corner office that Paul desperately wanted.
Right, a very familiar scenario.
Now, if you look closely at the underlying physics of this situation, both men are completely driven by passions, these external emotional triggers that have hijacked their minds. They actually share the exact same love for the exact same object. Technically, their desires are perfectly aligned.
Precisely. Their desires are identical. But because they are bound by the cruel physical limitations of this object, because the nature of a single corner office means they cannot both wholly possess it at the same time, their identical desires inevitably clash.
They crash into each other.
Yes. Their shared love literally becomes the engine of their mutual hatred.
It is a devastating little paradox, and it's kind of darkly funny when you think about it. We see this all the time. Two people silently warring over the office thermostat, or two siblings fighting over the last slice of cake. The shared desire is what creates the war.
It exposes the incredibly fickle, dangerous nature of living a life dictated by passion. When we are ruled by these external forces, we are essentially being pulled in a dozen different directions by things completely outside of our control.
We're just reacting.
Constantly reacting, because our emotions fluctuate wildly based on random external triggers.
Yeah.
A passing comment, a change in the weather, who gets the corner office. Humans in the grip of passion are naturally unstable. We become infinitely variable.
Wow.
We become contrary not just to each other, engaging in endless wrestling matches over finite resources, but we become contrary to ourselves from one day to the next. We are adrift. We are just blind atoms crashing into each other in the dark.
Which brings up the obvious question. If passions make us blind atoms crashing into each other, how do we ever stop the collision? How is a true, enduring human society even possible?
We stop clashing only when we are guided by the steady light of reason. There's a stunning, almost mathematical claim made here in the book. Human beings only truly agree in nature, they only perfectly align when they're acting rationally.
Because reason changes the goal.
Exactly. When we are guided by reason, we are no longer fighting over finite physical things that can only belong to one person. We are seeking understanding.
And that fundamentally transforms human interaction. It changes it from a desperate zero-sum game into a non-zero-sum game.
Yes, that is the perfect way to phrase it.
Think about Peter and Paul fighting over that corner office. One man's gain is inherently and necessarily the other man's loss. But the knowledge of the universe, the rational truth of reality, is utterly infinite. What is rationally good for one person, achieving clear, pure understanding, is inherently and equally good for absolutely everyone else.
Exactly. You can possess a truth without ever diminishing my ability to possess that exact same truth. If you understand the laws of physics, it doesn't leave less physics for me to understand.
Right.
In fact, your understanding actually enhances mine. From this shared infinite resource of truth, we see the birth of true society and true social virtues in the book. Take religion, or piety, for example.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
True piety has absolutely nothing to do with fear or superstition or performing rituals to appease an angry deity. True piety is simply the pure desire to do good that is born directly from our own rational understanding of the universe.
And friendship, too. The book defines friendship in such a cool way. True friendship isn't a messy transaction of shifting passions. It is the
Every single individual judges what is good or bad solely based on their own immediate survival and the turbulent dictates of their own specific passions.
It sounds like an exhausting way to exist, just perpetual paranoia.
It is a state of constant fear. Humans quickly realize that to avoid the endless danger of their clashing, unpredictable passions, they have no choice but to unite. They must form a state.
Right.
But to do this, to achieve this fragile safety, they must surrender their individual natural right to exact revenge and pursue their own unchecked desires. They hand that power over to the civil state.
They give up the right to bite back.
Yes. The state then uses laws and, most importantly, the psychological threat of punishment to impose harmony. The very concepts of justice, injustice, merit, and sin do not exist in nature. They are entirely artificial constructs. They're born the exact moment the state is formed, designed as tools to restrain our passions when reason alone fails to do so.
It's a sobering thought that justice is basically an artificial invention to keep us from destroying each other over the last slice of cake.
It really is.
But while we are talking about restraining passions and seeking this pure mental clarity, I want to gently pull the lens back to the physical body itself. We are entirely physical creatures, breathing and pulsing. How does this high-minded concept of reason actually apply to our flesh and blood, to our day-to-day physical health?
The mind and the body are bound together as one expression of reality in this book. What is fundamentally good for the physical body is whatever helps it interact with the external world in a vast, diverse multitude of ways.
Yeah.
A highly capable, adaptable body directly supports a highly capable, adaptable mind. But the absolute core identity of your body is maintained by a very specific, incredibly delicate proportion of motion and rest among all of its parts.
Proportion of motion and rest. That phrase... Physical chord.
A chord, yes.
As long as those specific notes are vibrating together at the right frequencies, you get a C major chord. If you drastically change the notes or the vibration stops, the chord ceases to exist. As long as your body maintains its unique equilibrium of motion and rest, you remain physically, recognizably you.
There's a perfect analogy, and it leads to a genuinely haunting redefinition of what death actually is.
Yeah, this part is intense.
Death isn't just the final moment the heart stops beating and the body turns into a corpse. Death is simply any radical, irreversible change that irreparably destroys that essential, defining proportion of motion and rest.
And this brings up an anecdote from the book that I honestly haven't been able to stop thinking about. It is deeply unsettling, the tragedy of the Spanish poet.
Yes, the Spanish poet.
The story goes that a Spanish poet suffered a catastrophic illness, a terrible fever. Physically, his biological body survived the ordeal. His heart continued to beat. But the illness completely erased his mind. He forgot his entire past. He forgot every single one of the brilliant plays he had written. He forgot entirely how to speak his own native language. He was left essentially as a blank slate, an infant utterly trapped inside a fully grown adult's body.
The clinical analysis of this tragedy in the book is profound. The argument is that the Spanish poet, the specific man who lived those years and wrote those magnificent plays, effectively died.
He died, even though he was breathing.
Yes, the biological entity that recovered from the fever was, in its foundational essence, a completely different person. The original intricate proportion of motion and rest that sustained his specific complex identity was violently destroyed by the illness. The continuity of his self was shattered.
It really forces you to realize how incredibly fragile we are, suspended on this delicate thread of balance. We see versions of this today with severe dementia or traumatic brain injuries. The biology continues, but the person we knew is gone.
It's a very quiet, very heavy realization.
And speaking of this fragile balance, let's look at how we navigate it emotionally. There is an exhaustive, almost surgical decoding of our deepest feelings in this book. It categorizes them with a strictness that is both mathematically beautiful and totally relentless. Let's start with the absolute basics: joy and sorrow.
The categorization is driven entirely by our capacity to act in the world. Joy, and a general baseline of cheerfulness, is inherently universally good.
Because it expands us.
Exactly. Because joy literally increases our body and mind's capacity to act, to interact, and to understand. It is an expansion of our power. Conversely, sorrow and deep melancholy is inherently evil. Sorrow is rigidly defined as a transition to a lesser state of perfection. It actively diminishes, restrains, and suffocates our power to act.
But there is a very careful warning about the danger of obsessive pleasure. The concept used is titillation, an excessive, highly localized pleasure.
Yes, titillation.
I like to think of it as doom scrolling on your phone. Imagine getting this intense, localized dopamine hit from just staring at a screen for 3 hours. It completely hijacks your nervous system. It drains all the energy and focus from the rest of your body and mind, crippling your overall capacity to function. You aren't interacting with the world. You are just feeding this one tiny loop.
Yes, and here's where the logic becomes brilliantly pragmatic. It notes that physical or mental pain can actually be considered profoundly good in this one specific scenario.
Pain can be good.
If the pain is sharp enough and sudden enough, say, dropping your phone on your face, it can snap a person out of that destructive, obsessive loop of titillation. It acts as a reset.
It completely strips away our conventional labels of good and bad, measuring everything by its pure utility to the holistic organism. And this strict utility leads to an absolute, uncompromising condemnation of hate. Hate is never, under any circumstances, considered good.
Never. Hate is a pure form of sorrow. It is intrinsically linked to the idea of an external cause actively destroying us. Therefore, A purely rational person will always seek to repay hate with love and nobility.
But not to be nice.
Exactly. They do not do this out of a soft sense of moral sentimentality or a desire to be a martyr. They do it simply because returning hate with more hate merely multiplies the sorrow, exponentially increasing the destruction of their own power.
Okay, this is exactly where we reach the most genuinely breathtaking, aggressively counterintuitive realities of this entire philosophy. When I first encountered this section, I just sat in absolute silence for a while. It systematically dismantles the very emotions we have been culturally conditioned to revere as holy. Let's look at hope and fear. Most of us think of hope as a profound virtue, a necessary light in the dark.
And yet here, hope and fear are both classified as inherently lacking. They're not good. Both of them imply a fundamental lack of understanding.
They are just doubt.
They represent a mind that is suspended in painful doubt, wavering uncertainly about a future outcome it cannot control. A fully rational mind, one that truly understands the necessary, unchangeable laws of the universe, has absolutely no need for the desperate instability of hope, nor the paralyzing grip of fear. It simply understands what is and accepts it with serene clarity.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate for you listening, because the next one is pity. This is perhaps the hardest pill to swallow. The argument is that pity is fundamentally evil. Wait. If I see someone suffering, feeling sorry for them is what makes me human. Empathy is the glue of society. How can feeling pity possibly be evil?
It is a jarring thought. But remember the rigid definitions we established. Pity is defined as the act of feeling sorrow over someone else's pain. And we have already firmly established that sorrow inherently diminishes our own power.
Right, sorrow suffocates us.
Therefore, feeling pity physically and mentally weakens us. It infects us with the other person's suffering without actually doing anything to solve the root cause.
Ah, I see. So you don't jump into the quicksand to save someone, you throw them a rope from solid ground.
Exactly. A truly rational person absolutely helps others. In fact, they are deeply compelled to help. But they absolutely do not do it out of a bleeding, sorrowful, pitying heart. They help others from a strong, unwavering, and completely proactive dictate of reason. It relentlessly forces us to separate effective, virtuous action from debilitating, passive emotion.
That makes a lot of sense when you frame it as action versus paralysis, and the exact same strict logic is applied to humility and repentance. We are taught from childhood that these are the highest moral virtues, but here they are not true virtues at all.
They stem entirely from impotence and debilitating sorrow. To repent is merely to be sad about a past action you cannot change. To be humble is merely to be sad about your own perceived weakness.
But the book makes a concession, doesn't it?
It does. However, there is a fascinating, deeply cynical sociological concession made here. It is admitted that while these are certainly not virtues for the truly rational individual, they are desperately necessary for the masses.
Because without them,
Without the heavy constraints instilled by repentance, enforced humility, and the fear of punishment, society would be instantly torn apart by the irrational mob. They are simply the lesser of two evils for those who are incapable of being guided by reason.
it is a staggering, unvarnished view of human society, and it ultimately leaves us to grapple with the destructive extremes of the human ego: pride, self-abasement, and glory. Maximum pride is identified as the ultimate symptom of maximum ignorance. The truly proud man is completely detached from the reality of his own limitations. He surrounds himself only with flatterers who eagerly feed his delusion. And self-abasement, it is completely unmasked as just the dark flip side of pride, a hollow, performative sorrow filled with hidden envy.
Which brings us to the final fatal distraction, the endless pursuit of external validation. There is a stark line drawn between true honor, which arises quietly from a stable life governed by internal reason, and empty glory. Glory is defined as the frantic, exhausting chase for the fickle validation of the mob.
This was written centuries ago, but it sounds exactly like entrusting your mental health to a social media algorithm or an anonymous comment section. You are handing your emotional stability to the most unstable, unpredictable entity imaginable, the shifting tides of public opinion. Chasing glory inevitably leads to profound anxiety and ultimately psychological ruin.
It is a timeless trap.
When you look back over the quiet, profound landscape we have just crossed together, wait, let me just say, it is staggering. We have watched almost every single everyday assumption we hold about our own morality be meticulously dismantled. All the warm, comforting romanticism we attach to emotions like pity and hope and humility has been stripped away. And in their place, we are left with the cold, pure, incredibly demanding power of rational understanding. True freedom isn't doing whatever our whims dictate. It is profoundly understanding the reality of what we actually are. We now see that our passions are like a violent storm, and reason is the solitary compass that points toward true freedom. But recognizing that compass and actually having the strength to hold it steady against the howling winds of our own human nature, well, those are two completely different things. How exactly does a human being trapped in a fragile body, surrounded by an endlessly chaotic world, ever actually achieve this ultimate rational freedom? We find ourselves standing on a really profound, almost delicate boundary right now.
Right on the threshold.
Yeah, exactly. As we step into part 9 of our continuous exploration of this book, we're crossing this quiet line from human bondage, where we're just violently pushed around by our passions, into the true, unshakable freedom that comes from the power of the intellect.
It is a profound transition to witness, especially in this quiet hour of reflection. We are moving past the noise of our reactive lives to observe something much deeper.
We're going to explore exactly how pure reason can take the wheel, transforming our chaotic actions into deliberate movements.
Right. We'll look closely at Spinoza's ultimate portrait of a truly free person. We'll watch him calmly dismantle the deeply held illusions of past philosophers like Descartes.
And finally, uncover the precise psychological mechanics of how to neutralize our most painful emotions simply by understanding them.
To understand how we break free, we first have to look at how we move through the world. We so often act out of blind momentum.
A sudden flash of anger, a desperate burst of joy.
Exactly. But Spinoza offers a really stunning, quiet realization here in Proposition 59. He tells us that any action driven by a chaotic, passive emotion can also be initiated by calm, calculated reason.
I mean, think of it like a boat out on the water. You can absolutely be hurled toward a destination by a wild, unpredictable storm.
Which is passive emotion.
Right. You arrive, but you're battered. You're entirely at the mercy of the wind and totally exhausted. Or you can sit in the quiet of a clear morning, take up the oars, and calmly, deliberately row yourself to that exact same destination.
Which is reason.
Exactly. The physical action is the same, but the internal reality is completely different.
The physical coordinates of the boat haven't changed at all, but the nature of the journey has been fundamentally transformed. The storm represents our passions, external forces dictating our path.
But when you row,
you are the active cause of your own existence. This brings us right to the root of why those storms, those passive emotions, are so inherently dangerous to us. Spinoza outlines this beautifully in Propositions 60 and 61.
Where he addresses the fatal flaw of our passions.
Right. They are deeply, tragically narrow. They only care about a tiny fraction of who we are.
It's the problem of partial desires. Let's ground this in something incredibly mundane, but, universally understood. Imagine it's late at night. And you have an overwhelming craving for incredibly greasy, sugary junk food.
We have all been there.
Right. That craving, that really specific desire, is springing from a localized joy in just one part of your body, your tongue, maybe your brain's immediate dopamine receptors.
But that desire is completely blind to the rest of you.
Totally blind. It ignores the well-being of your whole person, the sluggishness you'll feel tomorrow, the long-term toll on your heart. Passive emotions are always zooming in too closely on one tiny, fragmented part of your existence.
Reason, on the other hand, operates with a wide-angle lens. Reason looks at the whole picture, the entire organism, which is why a desire born of reason can never be excessive.
Because it naturally balances the whole.
Exactly. And that wide-angle lens of reason doesn't just apply to physical space. It applies to the dimension of time, which he tackles in Proposition 62.
This is where we see the contrast between imagination and reason most starkly, I think.
Definitely. Our imagination is heavily biased toward the present moment. It inflates the size of present desires. It makes a temporary pleasure right in front of you look like a massive mountain, completely obscuring the horizon.
But reason views time as a flat landscape.
A completely flat landscape. To pure reason, the past, the present, and the future hold the exact same weight. It calculates future goods with the same mathematical certainty as immediate ones.
So a rational person can easily forego a small present joy if they see it jeopardizes a greater future good.
And not out of grim self-denial. That is the key. They do it out of a calm mathematical clarity.
Which fundamentally changes the way we navigate our choices, and it shifts our motivation entirely, bringing us to Propositions 63 through 66.
There is a world of difference between doing something to avoid a negative outcome versus doing it to actively pursue a positive one.
If you are acting strictly out of fear, the fear of punishment, the fear of poverty, the fear of missing out, Spinoza argues you're not being guided by reason at all.
You are still a slave to passion.
Take two people eating. One is a profoundly sick person who gags down a bitter, chalky medicine entirely out of the sheer terror of dying. The other is a healthy, vibrant person eating a beautifully cooked, nutritious meal purely for the joy of vitality and life.
Both are putting something in their bodies to survive.
But the internal mechanism is radically different. Reason directly seeks the good. It only avoids evil as a secondary, almost accidental byproduct of walking toward the light.
It is a shift from running away from the shadows to actively walking toward the sun. And when you consolidate all of these traits, acting for the whole, weighing time equally, seeking the good rather than fleeing the bad, he presents us with his masterpiece.
The portrait of the free person.
Yes, the culmination of his ethical vision.
And nothing captures that vision quite like Proposition 67. It might be one of the most beautiful thoughts in the entire book. Spinoza writes that a free person thinks of nothing less than death. Their entire wisdom is a meditation on life.
It is such a quiet, defiant stance against so much of human history's obsession with mortality.
The free person doesn't waste their intellectual energy brooding over the end, or paralyzed by the fear of the inevitable.
Their focus is fiercely, entirely on the active continuation of their being.
Because to fixate on death is to be governed by fear.
Which, as we just established, is a passive emotion. A meditation on life is a meditation on what is within your power. And if we take this portrait of the free person to its absolute logical extreme, as he does in Proposition 68, we hit a truly radical idea.
The illusion of good and evil.
He argues that if humans were born entirely free, perfectly rational from their very first breath, the concepts of good and evil wouldn't even exist in their vocabulary.
Because good and evil are relative human constructs.
Yeah.
They're judgments we make based on how things affect us personally. We call the rain good when it waters our crops. And we call it evil when it floods our basement.
But the rain is just the rain.
Exactly. A perfectly rational being wouldn't judge nature. They would just understand it. They would see the universe as an endless chain of necessity.
But of course, we are not born perfectly rational. And we do not live in a vacuum. We live in a messy, irrational world, which forces the free person to navigate society carefully.
Which brings us to Propositions 69 through 73.
Right. He outlines the practical survival guide for this rational being. For instance, he points out that to a free person, fleeing from a physical danger requires the exact same amount of courage and presence of mind as fighting.
Society might call the fighter a hero and the fleer a coward.
But reason dictates that preserving your life efficiently is the ultimate goal. Sometimes walking away is the highest expression of rational courage.
And that careful navigation extends to social dynamics as well. The free person is profoundly cautious about accepting favors from the ignorant.
Meaning those driven by passion rather than reason.
Right. When an irrational person does you a favor, they usually attach invisible, emotionally volatile strings to it. They expect a return on investment based on their own narrow imaginative desires.
A free person avoids that entanglement. They know that true gratitude, the kind that doesn't feel like a heavy, suffocating debt, only really exists between individuals who share that same rational framework.
Which brings us to the ultimate paradox of the free person's social existence, Proposition 73.
You might assume that this hyper-rational, sovereign individual would want to escape society altogether, to live as a hermit on a mountain, completely free from the arbitrary rules of others.
But Spinoza argues the exact opposite. A free person is actually freer living under common laws than living completely alone.
Which feels entirely counterintuitive until you really unpack it.
So how do we unpack it?
Think of it like driving on a vast open highway. If there are no traffic laws, no speed limits, no lanes, no designated directions, you might technically have the freedom to drive however you want.
But in reality, you are trapped in a state of paralyzing chaos.
Exactly. You are constantly terrified of a head-on collision. You are inching along in fear of the unpredictable passions of every other driver. That isn't freedom.
But when you have a system of common laws,
Traffic lights,
speed limits,
and everyone agrees to obey them, you suddenly gain the actual freedom to travel efficiently and safely to your destination.
the laws don't restrict your freedom, they facilitate it. A free person understands that rational cooperation with the state is the ultimate tool for personal preservation.
So we have this beautifully constructed vision of a life guided by reason, but Spinoza knows we are not just logical machines. We bleed. We grieve, we rage.
We do.
And so, as we transition into the next major phase of the book, the preface to Part 5, the tone shifts inward. We are entering the inner sanctum. The focus turns entirely to the mind's profound, almost magical ability to heal itself.
This is where Spinoza acts as a surgeon of the human psyche. And before he introduces his own method for healing, he has to clear the operating table of past philosophical mistakes.
He starts with a critique of the Stoics, who believed that through sheer willpower, we have absolute perfect control over our emotions.
Spinoza, who understood human nature so deeply, gently points out that this is a fantasy. We all know the exhaustion of trying to white-knuckle our way through grief or anger. It just doesn't work.
But his real target, the illusion he takes apart piece by piece, is René Descartes.
Descartes and the infamous pineal gland. It is almost hard to believe how literal Descartes was about this. He needed to explain how a completely immaterial soul could possibly interact with a physical, fleshy body.
So he claimed the soul sat right in the center of the brain, inside this tiny, physical pineal gland.
And from this little command center, the immaterial soul would somehow nudge the gland to direct animal spirits through the nerves, moving the body like a pilot operating a joystick.
It is a profoundly flawed attempt to bridge a massive philosophical gap.
I always think of it like trying to steer a 2-ton heavy physical car using a ghostly, immaterial, transparent steering wheel.
It is objectively absurd.
You can turn that ghost wheel all you want, but without physical friction, without mass, the car isn't going to budge. It is almost comical when you picture it.
Spinoza calmly, methodically points out this glaring logical absurdity. He basically asks, how can something with zero physical properties exert a physical force on a gland?
Descartes couldn't answer it.
Spinoza exposes this theory not as science, but as an occult quality, a magical, hidden mechanism masquerading as philosophy.
And by sweeping away Descartes' ghostly steering wheel, Spinoza makes room for one of his most important psychological breakthroughs.
Laid out in Proposition 1 of this new section, mind-body parallelism.
He completely eliminates the problem of interaction by saying they don't interact at all. They're the same thing, expressing themselves in two different languages.
The order and connection of thoughts in the mind directly mirrors the order and connection of physical changes in the body.
Let's really break that down, because it is the key to everything that follows. When you feel a sudden wave of embarrassment, your mind generates a thought of shame, and your body physically blushes. Blood rushes to your cheeks.
Descartes would say the mind felt shame, pulled a lever in the pineal gland, and forced the blood to the face.
Spinoza says, no. The thought of shame and the physical rush of blood are the exact same event. One is the event experienced through the attribute of thought. The other is the event experienced through the attribute of physical extension.
They play out simultaneously, perfectly parallel, without one causing the other.
And because they are parallel, it means that if you can change the order of your thoughts, you are simultaneously changing the physical reality of your emotions.
This is the foundation for Propositions 2, 3, and 4, which represent the core psychological toolkit of the entire book.
Spinoza reveals that if you detach an emotion from the external thing that caused it, the love or the hate is destroyed.
And even more profoundly, the exact moment you form a clear, analytical understanding of a passive emotion, it immediately stops being passive.
This is where philosophy becomes active therapy. It is like being trapped in a pitch-black room. You wake up, and there is a terrifying, hulking shadow looming over you in the corner.
You are paralyzed by fear, a completely passive emotion.
You are hostage to the shadow. But the moment you reach out, turn on the light of your intellect, and actually analyze what is casting the shadow,
you realize it is just a pile of laundry on a chair.
the laundry is still there, the physical object hasn't changed, but your understanding of it has become clear and distinct. In that exact fraction of a second, the terror simply evaporates.
The emotion is completely tamed by the act of understanding it.
Because an emotion like fear or anger relies on confusion.
It relies on a misunderstanding of reality. When you shine the light of reason on your anger, you separate the feeling from the external trigger. You look at the anger as a mechanism, a chain of events.
And in doing so, you step outside of it. You are no longer the storm, you are the meteorologist studying the storm.
This therapeutic power of understanding is deeply tied to Propositions 5 and 6, which deal with the calming power of necessity.
Right. Spinoza asks us to look at why things hurt so much. An emotion directed at something we just imagined could have been different is infinitely more painful than an emotion directed at something we understand as absolutely necessary.
Our deepest mental agonies come from the words, what if?
What if I had left 5 minutes earlier? What if they hadn't said that? We torture ourselves with imaginary alternate realities.
But Spinoza insists those alternate realities do not exist. Everything that happens is the only thing that could have ever happened, driven by the absolute necessity of the universe.
Let's apply this to a very human experience.
Yeah.
If you are sitting in a room and a newborn baby starts screaming at the top of its lungs, you might feel a headache coming on.
But you don't feel a deep, burning moral fury at the infant? You don't feel betrayed.
Why? Because you understand that it is fundamentally in the baby's nature to cry. It lacks the capacity for anything else in that moment. It is necessary.
Spinoza is asking us to view the entire universe, every tragic event, every difficult person, every personal failure, through that exact same lens.
If someone cuts you off in traffic or betrays your trust, they're acting out of a complex web of past traumas, biological impulses, and environmental conditioning that made their action inevitable.
When you view all events with that lens of absolute necessity, the sharp edges of your grief and anger just naturally dissolve. You cannot be angry at a hurricane for raining. You simply understand it is a storm.
It is a radical acceptance of reality as it is. And as we conclude this detailed analysis with propositions 7 through 9, Spinoza shows us how to fortify this new state of mind.
Emotions born of reason, like the calm joy of understanding, are ultimately stronger and more enduring than the fleeting passions of sudden luck or immediate gratification.
Furthermore, when a massive, complex emotion threatens to overwhelm you, you can dilute its harmful impact by breaking it down into its many different causes.
If you are devastated by a loss, and you realize that loss was the result of 1,000 different intersecting variables stretching back to the beginning of time, the weight of your sorrow is distributed across the entire universe.
Rather than crushing your single soul.
It is the ultimate alchemy of the human mind. The pain doesn't necessarily disappear, but its nature is transmuted. It becomes a stepping stone to a higher understanding.
Which leaves us with a rather haunting, beautiful paradox to consider as we sit with these thoughts.
If Spinoza is right, if the ultimate tool for neutralizing all negative emotion is pure, cold, mathematical understanding of the universe's necessity, does that mean a perfectly rational, truly free person would completely lose the ability to feel pity or empathy for the suffering of others?
If you see someone's tragedy as merely an inevitable equation of nature, do you stop feeling their pain?
It forces us to ask what we are willing to trade for peace.
Does reaching the pinnacle of human intellectual joy require leaving a piece of our human fragility behind?
Think about the quietest moments of the night. You know, when the noise of the day finally fades and you're just left entirely alone with your own mind.
Yeah. It's in that profound silence that we often realize just how completely we're at the mercy of our own internal storms.
Exactly. I mean, you know the feeling. We get tossed around by these sudden waves of anger, or we're swept away by deep anxieties about the future.
Or anchored down by heavy, lingering regrets. It really does feel so often like we are entirely adrift in a vast emotional ocean.
With absolutely no compass and no shore in sight.
Right.
But what if there was a map? What if someone had meticulously charted the exact mechanics of the human mind, plotting a definitive course out of all that chaotic suffering?
And into a state of absolute, unshakable tranquility.
Yeah. That is exactly what we are exploring in the book before us today. We're looking at the culminating ideas of Spinoza's philosophy.
It is essentially his ultimate roadmap for human freedom.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we are going to trace this path step by step, from formulating really simple rules for daily life to experiencing what he calls the intellectual love of God.
Which ultimately leads to discovering the true meaning of eternity.
Right, because we want to ensure you understand the absolute depths of this philosophy, not just as some dusty abstract theory, but as a practical living anchor for your own mind.
It's a beautiful journey to embark upon, and to really grasp it, I think we need to pace our thoughts deliberately here.
Let's do that. Where do we start?
The foundational concept in the book is about mastering the storm through what we might call the proactive mind. The premise is deeply empowering, actually.
How so?
Well, as long as we aren't entirely overwhelmed by emotions that are contrary to our nature, those negative, debilitating passions like hatred or paralyzing fear.
Right.
As long as we aren't completely crushed by those, we actually possess the innate power to order and connect our physical affections according to the order of our intellect.
But there is a catch to that, isn't there?
A massive one. It has everything to do with timing. It is entirely about when we choose to do this mental work.
Right, because if you wait until you were in the middle of a full-blown panic attack or blindingly furious at someone who just betrayed you.
Your intellect is absolutely not in the driver's seat.
No, your body is totally taken over.
Exactly. The core argument here is that we must establish rational maxims, these rules of life, long before the emotional crisis actually hits.
It makes me think of a sailor preparing for a long, unpredictable voyage.
That's a great way to picture it.
Like, a seasoned sailor doesn't wait for the sky to turn black and a Category 5 hurricane to bear down on them to suddenly decide, hey, I should probably learn how to tie a secure knot right now.
Right. Or figure out how to reef the sails.
Exactly. The wind is howling, the deck is pitching, and it is way too late for a lesson in basic seamanship.
It's impossible.
So they practice those knots on a calm, quiet, sunny afternoon. They sit on the dock and tie them over and over until the movement bypasses active thought entirely.
It just becomes pure muscle memory.
Yeah. So when the storm does hit, their hands just know what to do.
Oh.
And the philosophy here suggests we have to do the exact same thing with our mental habits.
We must meditate on positive, rational principles when our minds are totally at peace. So those principles become our default setting.
It's highly practical.
It really is. A very specific example offered in the text is the rule that hatred must be overcome by love or by high-mindedness.
Which sounds nice, but it's incredibly hard to do in the moment.
Because if you wait until someone deeply insults you to try and summon a loving, high-minded response out of thin air, the sheer violent force of your sudden anger will just instantly crush your fragile intention.
Doesn't stand a chance.
No. But if you sit quietly on a peaceful day, perhaps right beside a fire, and deeply reflect on the reality of human behavior.
Anticipating the things people do.
Right. If you anticipate the common offenses, the misunderstandings, the injuries that inevitably happen simply because we are human.
Because they will happen.
They absolutely will. And you purposefully connect the mental image of those potential injuries to the concept of understanding and love.
You are actually forging a brand new physical pathway in your brain.
Exactly. You bind the idea of the inevitable wrong to the maxim of reason.
So when the actual insult happens, your mind doesn't have to scramble in the dark for a response. The rule of life is already there, vividly present.
Ready to neutralize the venom before it can even circulate.
It's fascinating how this applies not just to anger, but to the everyday traps of human ambition as well.
Oh, absolutely. Think about our desperate, exhausting desire for esteem.
Yeah, we spend immense amounts of energy worrying about our reputation, about what others think of us, about our status.
The psychology behind that in the text is remarkably observant. A wise person, when reflecting on the concept of honor or esteem, focuses entirely on its correct application.
Meaning how it can be used positively.
Yes. They think about how honor can be used to foster genuine friendship, mutual aid, and a cooperative society. They focus on the reliable, virtuous means to achieve that noble end.
But a weak or powerless mind operates in a completely different reality.
Totally different. A person caught in the agonizing trap of ambition obsesses only over the vanity of the world,
They constantly dwell on the faults of other people.
complaining bitterly about human fickleness and the unfairness of society.
It is essentially the 17th century equivalent of doom scrolling, isn't it?
That is exactly what it is.
You see people constantly complaining about billionaires, loudly lamenting the vices of the wealthy and the corruption of money. But often it feels like they are just deeply frustrated by their own lack of it.
Right. They aren't complaining out of a pure, elevated sense of justice. They secretly crave the exact same wealth and status they are denouncing.
It is a very wry, timeless observation.
They torment themselves, wanting to appear intellectually superior or morally pure by pointing out the world's endless flaws, when in reality, they're just exposing their own profound hunger for external validation.
So what's the remedy offered for this exhausting cycle?
The power of clear and distinct ideas. You see, human emotions are messy.
Very messy.
And the more an image or an emotion is tangled up with external things, blaming this person, resenting that situation, the more frequently it arises to torment the mind.
But by forming a clear and distinct idea of our emotions, by stripping away the external blame, and understanding exactly why we feel what we feel, according to the laws of human nature.
We strip the emotion of its passive, agonizing power over us. We effectively neutralize the pain simply by observing it with perfect clarity.
That actually brings up a really interesting tension, doesn't it?
How so?
Because that transition from passive suffering to active, clear understanding it fundamentally changes how we view our place in the world.
It does. It shifts the focus from the internal mechanics of our emotions to our relationship with the universe as a whole.
Or as the text refers to it, God.
Mm.
But I think we need to tread very carefully here, because the God described in this philosophy is radically different from the traditional figure most people might imagine.
It is a total paradigm shift. If you are picturing a personal, patriarchal deity sitting on a throne above the clouds, keeping a meticulous ledger of human sins,
Judging our daily actions.
or granting favors if we just pray hard enough,
Yeah.
you have to let that image go entirely. In this philosophical framework, God is synonymous with the infinite, necessary order of all existence.
God is nature itself.
Precisely.
So we are talking about the immutable laws of physics, the endless, unbroken chain of cause and effect, the absolute totality of everything that is, was, and ever will be.
It is a deeply pantheistic vision, meaning that God and the universe are exactly the same thing. There is no separation between the creator and the creation.
Okay, so when the text discusses loving God, it is not talking about religious devotion in the traditional sense.
Not at all. It's talking about a profound, reverent alignment with the absolute reality of the universe.
The logic flows like this, right?
Yeah.
Whoever truly understands themselves and their emotions clearly and distinctly feels a deep, unshakable joy.
Yes. Because this understanding is a direct realization of infinite truth.
And this joy is inherently accompanied by the idea of God, or nature, as its cause. Therefore, whoever understands themselves naturally loves God.
That is the natural progression.
Wait, I want to gently push back on that phrasing for a moment.
Sure.
If God is just the infinite universe, the laws of physics, biology, cause and effect, and God doesn't possess human emotions, why even call it love?
That is a very fair question.
Isn't that just a deep scientific appreciation? Because this philosophy is very clear that this love is an absolute one-way street. God is complete and perfect, meaning God is completely free from all passive emotions.
God cannot feel pleasure, and God certainly cannot feel pain.
Right, so that is the crux of it. It's a challenging concept to absorb.
God cannot be moved by sadness or sudden bursts of joy. And because of that, strictly speaking, God cannot love or hate anyone in the human sense of those words.
So to demand that the universe loves you back in the intimate, validating way a parent or a romantic partner loves you, that is fundamentally absurd.
To ask that of God is to demand that God ceases to be infinite and perfect, and instead becomes a limited, emotionally fluctuating human being.
It's like having a deep, abiding love for gravity.
Yeah.
Imagine standing on a cliff edge, marveling at the sheer perfection of gravity. You might feel a profound sense of awe, deep gratitude, and yes, even love for gravity, because it grounds your reality.
It keeps the oceans securely in their beds. It holds the atmosphere to the earth.
Exactly. It allows the entire breathtaking symphony of the cosmos to play out. It holds your whole world together. But you would never step off that cliff and expect gravity to feel emotionally attached to you.
No, you definitely wouldn't.
You don't expect gravity to suspend its own fundamental nature just to catch you because it cares about you. You love gravity because of its flawless, necessary perfection, not because it will ever love you back.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. And while that might sound cold at first, recognizing this actually brings a tremendous quiet relief.
How so?
Because it completely removes the exhausting, perpetual anxiety of trying to please a volatile, unpredictable deity. You don't have to bargain with the universe.
You simply have to understand it.
Yes, and viewing love this way provides the ultimate foolproof antidote to human envy and jealousy.
Think about how we usually experience love or desire. When we experience romantic love or when we relentlessly pursue material wealth, we are dealing in the realm of finite resources.
Right. If I have a specific piece of gold, you cannot have that exact same piece of gold.
And if my romantic partner suddenly gives their deep attention and affection to someone else, I inherently feel diminished. Human love is so often shadowed by the agonizing fear of loss.
Because it is based on scarcity. But the intellectual love of God, this profound understanding of the universe, operates in a realm of absolute infinity.
This love cannot be tainted by jealousy or envy.
The truth of the universe cannot be used up or hoarded. In fact, unlike material things that inherently divide us when we try to share them, this intellectual love actually grows stronger and more resonant the more people share in it.
If you deeply understand the majesty of the universe, and I come to understand it too, my joy doesn't subtract a single drop from yours.
It multiplies it. It creates an unbreakable, quiet bond of shared understanding that elevates everyone involved.
As we let that peaceful realization settle in, it paves the way for what is arguably the most complex and mind-bending concept in this entire framework.
The eternity of the mind.
Yes. And just to be completely clear, before we dive into this, we have to state what this is not.
A very necessary clarification.
This philosophy is very explicit that standard human memory, imagination, and the ability to recall what you had for breakfast yesterday or the sound of your childhood dog's bark.
All of that dies entirely and completely with the physical body.
Yes, that must be understood. There's no ethereal ghost looking down from a fluffy cloud retaining your personal human memories and personality quirks.
The death of the physical body means the absolute, undeniable end of the personal narrative self that navigates the linear timeline of the physical world.
The mind can only imagine and remember things for as long as the physical body endures to interact with the world.
So the temporal remembering part of the mind dies.
But here is the profound distinction. There is a part of the human mind that is absolutely eternal. And this eternal essence isn't something that mysteriously begins after you die. It is something that exists outside of time altogether.
It is a shift from thinking about duration, living for a very long time, to thinking about true eternity, which has no relationship to time at all.
Right.
The philosophy proposes that there is a specific idea which expresses the sheer essence of your physical body under the aspect of eternity. And this idea belongs natively to the eternal essence of God or the universe.
I was trying to wrap my head around this, and I had a bit of a light bulb moment. Is it kind of like the concept of a triangle?
Or
Imagine you are walking alone on a quiet beach. You find a stick, and you draw a triangle in the wet sand. Now, that physical triangle has a very clear, finite lifespan.
it was generated at a specific moment in time.
And in a few hours, the tide is going to come in and completely wash it away. The physical triangle will be utterly destroyed by time and the elements.
But the essence of a triangle.
Right. The eternal geometric truth that its internal angles will always add up to 180 degrees, that essence does not die when the tide washes the sand away.
No, it doesn't.
That essence was entirely true before you ever picked up the stick to draw it, and it remains entirely true long after the sand is smooth again. It is an eternal, logical necessity.
That is a brilliant synthesis. That is exactly how we are invited to understand our own eternal nature.
So my physical body is the triangle in the sand.
Your physical body, with its complex brain, its sensory organs, its accumulated memories, yes. It is entirely subject to the laws of time, to generation, and eventually to decay.
But the specific, unique idea that perfectly expresses the logical necessity of my existence.
The absolute truth of your essence. That is exactly like the mathematical law of the triangle. It is an eternal truth firmly held within the infinite intellect of the universe.
It never began in time, and therefore it can never end in time.
Because of this, we can, in moments of deep clarity, actually feel and experience that we are eternal. This isn't some hallucinatory mystical vision.
It is the quiet, undeniable realization of our own necessary permanent place within the infinite structure of reality.
And realizing that it really shifts everything about how we experience daily life.
It brings us to the very peak of this philosophical mountain, the concept of intuition and the intellectual love of God.
It essentially breaks human knowledge down into tiers.
So often, we stumble through our days using a much lower kind of knowledge. We see things as isolated, random, temporary events.
We see a sudden rainstorm ruining our picnic, or a financial loss, or a fleeting moment of joy, as random, disconnected incidents happening to us.
But as we actively elevate our minds and clarify our ideas, we reach what is called the third kind of knowledge.
This is the profound ability to see things sub specie eternitatis, which means under the aspect of eternity.
To see something under the aspect of eternity is to completely strip away the illusion of randomness and chaos.
It is to know a single everyday thing, truly, by seeing how it necessarily connects to the entirety of the universe.
You no longer see that rainstorm as a personal attack on your picnic.
You see it as a deeply necessary part of the planet's water cycle, driven by eternal laws of thermodynamics.
You stop seeing yourself as a fragmented, lonely being thrown haphazardly into a hostile, chaotic world.
You see every single event, every cause, every effect, including your own life, as an integral, deeply necessary thread in the infinite, beautiful tapestry of nature.
And when you perceive reality through this elevated third kind of knowledge, it produces the highest possible joy, the absolute maximum satisfaction the human mind is capable of experiencing.
And because this supreme, tranquil joy is accompanied by the idea of the universe, the idea of God as its eternal, immutable cause, it gives birth to amor Dei intellectualis.
The intellectual love of God.
This is the absolute core, the beating heart of everything we've discussed. But here is where we encounter an incredibly beautiful, almost breathtaking twist.
We established earlier that God, being totally free of passions, doesn't love anyone in a human emotional way.
Right, the gravity analogy. The universe doesn't have feelings for us.
Ex-
However, it is revealed later in the text that our intellectual love for God is actually a part of the infinite love with which God loves himself.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following this loop.
Take your time.
Because I am a part of nature, my mind is literally a small part of the infinite intellect of God.
Yes.
Therefore, when my mind achieves this supreme state of understanding, and I feel this profound intellectual love for the universe that is literally the universe using my mind to understand and love itself.
You've got it. We are the cosmos slowly waking up to its own eternal beauty. The human being is simply the conscious instrument through which infinite nature experiences the profound joy of its own perfection.
That is profoundly humbling. When you truly sit with that idea in the quiet of the night, you realize you are not a stranger wandering through this universe.
You are the universe.
And understanding this fundamentally destroys the fear of death, doesn't it?
Completely. Because when we achieve this state, the eternal part of our mind, the part that understands and loves the infinite, becomes vastly larger and more significant than the temporary physical part that is going to die.
Death still happens to the physical body, yes. The memories still fade away into nothing.
But the mind has so thoroughly identified itself with the eternal truth of reality that the loss of the temporary body is no longer viewed as a terrifying tragedy.
It is just the natural shifting of the sand on the beach.
Which brings us to a crucial, highly practical question. If this is true, how are we meant to live our lives day to day?
Right. If there's no punishing God waiting to judge us, why be good?
The philosophy directly confronts and completely dismantles the traditional, fear-based morality that has dominated so much of human history.
There is a deeply ingrained yet profoundly ignorant misconception that morality is a heavy, miserable burden.
That it is a strict set of rules we force ourselves to carry solely to avoid eternal punishment in hell, or to buy a ticket into a heavenly afterlife.
People often argue that if you took away the threat of hell, or the promise of a golden heaven, everyone would just immediately abandon reason.
They'd give in to their absolute basest lusts and live like wild animals.
But this perspective points out the absolute absurdity of that mindset.
It is as foolish as someone saying that because they cannot logically nourish their physical body with good, healthy food forever, they might as well just gorge themselves on deadly, agonizing poisons right now.
It implies that people only act decently because they are terrified, not because goodness, understanding, and virtue have any inherent value.
It is a tragic way to live. Instead, we are offered a profoundly empowering and radically different conclusion.
Blessedness, which we can understand as supreme happiness or true, unshakable peace of mind.
Blessedness is not the reward for being virtuous. It is the virtue itself.
This is a subtle but monumental shift in perspective.
We do not experience true joy because we tightly white-knuckle our way through life, forcibly restraining our natural desires and denying ourselves pleasure in the grim hope of a future post-mortem payout.
Right. It is exactly the other way around.
Yeah.
Because we cultivate this profound intellectual joy because we actually experience the serene, infinite beauty of understanding the universe. We naturally, effortlessly lose interest in those petty, destructive lusts.
You don't have to force yourself to stop chasing fleeting shadows when you are already standing in the deep, sustaining warmth of the sun.
The desire for those harmful things simply falls away on its own because you have found something infinitely more satisfying.
It creates a striking, incredibly quiet contrast between two very different ways of existing in this world.
On one side, you have the ignorant person.
This person is endlessly tossed around by external circumstances, forever chasing temporary pleasures, forever running in terror from temporary pains.
They are driven entirely by unconscious drives and external forces.
They are completely unaware of themselves, of God, and of the true nature of things. And because they are constantly reacting to the storm, they never, ever find true peace.
The moment the external stimulation stops, their very sense of existence seems to stop with it.
And on the other side, you have the wise person. The person who has done the quiet, persistent, proactive work of understanding.
This person is deeply conscious of themselves and of the eternal necessity of all things.
Now, they are not completely immune to the world. They still live in it. They still experience physical pain. They still interact with society.
But they remain utterly undisturbed in spirit. They possess a true, enduring peace of mind that cannot be shaken by the unpredictable, chaotic storms of fortune.
It is, without a doubt, a steep and extraordinarily difficult path to reach that state of wisdom. The text itself openly admits that the way is hard and it is found by very few.
But it exists, and the mere knowledge that such a state of absolute eternal tranquility is truly possible within the human mind is in itself a profound light in the dark.
It changes everything.
So as the noise of the day finally falls away and you are left in the quiet, I want to invite you to try something.
Think of a recent source of deep frustration in your life. Something that has been causing you intense anxiety, or a simmering anger, or a heavy sense of profound unfairness.
Picture that specific frustration very clearly in your mind right now. What would happen if, just for this very moment, you entirely stopped viewing that situation as a random, chaotic personal attack against you?
What if you tried to view it subspecie aeternitatis under the aspect of eternity?
What if you looked at that precise moment of pain not as an isolated tragedy, but as a necessary, inextricably connected tiny thread in the infinite beautiful fabric of the universe? Just sit with the immense quiet peace that comes from realizing you don't actually have to fight the universe at all.
You simply have to understand it.